Scrap metal. No real value. Those 4 words, spoken by one of Manhattan's most powerful auction executives in front of a room full of millionaires, would cost Victoria Sterling everything she thought she knew about success. Because the dusty, forgotten race car she'd just dismissed, the one gathering cobwebs in the corner while wealthy collectors laughed at the broke mechanic inspecting it, that piece of scrap metal was about to sell for $8.2 million. And the quiet single father she'd humiliated in his worn work jacket was about to teach her the most expensive lesson of her career. This is a story about what happens when ordinary people see things extraordinary people miss. About the difference between looking and actually seeing. About a discovery that would shake the collector world to its foundation and prove that sometimes, just sometimes, the things everyone else throws away are worth more than anything money can buy. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button. And drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Let's begin. The fluorescent lights in Manhattan's Sterling Elite Auction House buzzed overhead like angry insects, casting harsh shadows across hundreds of expensive items arranged throughout the cavernous showroom. Outside, rain hammered against the tall windows overlooking Fifth Avenue, blurring the city lights into watercolor streaks. Inside, the air smelled like old money, leather, wood polish, and the particular brand of cologne worn by people who'd never checked a price tag in their lives. Ethan Mercer didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. He stood in the back corner of the preview hall, hands shoved deep in the pockets of his faded Carhartt work jacket, feeling about as comfortable as a fish in a tuxedo. His boots, practical, scuffed, honest boots that had walked through more motor oil than marble lobbies, squeaked slightly on the polished floor. Around him, collectors in tailored suits moved like sharks through crystal water, circling rare paintings, antique furniture, and jewelry that cost more than most people's houses. Nobody looked at Ethan twice. Why would they? He was 32 but looked older, the kind of tired that comes from raising a kid alone while running a struggling business. His dark hair needed cutting. His jacket had a small oil stain near the left pocket that he'd scrubbed at for 20 minutes before giving up. His hands were clean but permanently stained in the creases. Mechanic's hands, working hands, hands that told the truth about who he was and where he came from. Brooklyn. Specifically, a narrow 2-story building in Sunset Park where the bottom floor was Mercer's auto repair and the top floor was home to him and his 6-year-old daughter, Lily. The auction preview had started an hour ago. Ethan had spent most of that time pretending to browse while actually trying not to knock anything over. Everything looked fragile and expensive and designed to make people like him feel inadequate. Then he'd found it. In the absolute back corner of the hall, partially hidden behind a Victorian settee and a stack of framed maritime paintings, sat something that made Ethan's heart actually skip. A race car. Well, calling it a race car was generous. It looked more like automotive roadkill, a mangled, rust-eaten corpse of what might have once been beautiful. The body panels were dented and scraped. The paint, where it still existed, had faded to a color that couldn't decide between gray and despair. One wheel was missing entirely. The exposed engine looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it, then left it underwater for a decade. It sat there like an embarrassment, like something that had wandered into the wrong neighborhood and couldn't find its way home. Ethan loved it immediately. He'd circled it 3 times already, crouching low to peer underneath, running his fingers along seams and joints that nobody else would notice. He'd pulled a small LED flashlight from his jacket, the same one he used to inspect the undercarriage of customer vehicles, and was currently lying on his back on the auction house's expensive floor, shining light up into the chassis. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you not to—" A security guard had approached twice already. Both times, Ethan had smiled apologetically, stood up, waited for the guard to leave, then gone right back to his inspection. He couldn't help it. There was something about this car, something that didn't add up. The frame construction was unusual, hand-welded, not manufactured. The materials were weird too, chromoly tubing in places where you'd expect mild steel. And the mounting points for the suspension, those weren't standard. Those were custom, old custom, the kind of fabrication work that didn't exist anymore because the people who knew how to do it were all dead. Ethan had grown up in garages. His father, Thomas Mercer, had been a mechanic too, a brilliant one, the kind who could listen to an engine and know exactly what was wrong before he even popped the hood. Thomas had died when Ethan was 19, leaving him a toolbox, a failing repair shop, and an education in automobiles that no school could teach. If you want to understand a car, his father used to say, you don't look at the pretty parts. You look at what's hidden, the welds, the metal, the decisions someone made when they thought nobody would ever check. Ethan was checking now. The preview hall had gotten more crowded as the evening wore on. Wealthy collectors drifted past, champagne glasses in hand, discussing provenance and investment potential. A woman in a dress that probably cost more than Ethan's truck was explaining to her husband why they absolutely needed the Baroque mirror near the entrance. Two men in matching Rolex watches were debating the authenticity of a supposed Rembrandt sketch. None of them even glanced at the broken race car in the corner, except one person. Ethan sensed her before he saw her, a change in the room's temperature, a subtle shift in how people moved and spoke. He looked up from where he was examining a curious casting mark on the rear differential housing and found himself face to face with Victoria Sterling. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 30, and carried herself with the kind of absolute confidence that comes from being born into the right family, attending the right schools, and never once doubting your place at the top of the food chain. Her dark hair was pulled back in a style that probably had a French name. Her suit was charcoal gray and fit like it had been constructed around her body by artisans. Her heels made sharp, declarative clicks against the floor. She looked at Ethan the way someone might look at a stain on expensive upholstery. "Are you actually considering bidding on this?" she asked. Her voice was smooth, educated, and carried just enough incredulity to let him know exactly what she thought of the idea. Ethan straightened up, tucking his flashlight back into his jacket pocket. "Maybe." Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "May I ask why?" "I like cars." "This isn't a car," she gestured at the wreck with one manicured hand. "This is scrap metal taking up valuable floor space." A small crowd had started to gather, not because they cared about the car, but because Victoria Sterling was talking to someone, and that alone made it worth watching. Ethan recognized the dynamic immediately. He was the entertainment, the amusing sideshow, the mechanic from Brooklyn who thought he belonged at a Manhattan auction. "Have you examined it?" Ethan asked quietly. Victoria's smile was polite and deadly. "I don't need to examine trash to know it's trash. This vehicle came from an estate sale. The original owner was a hoarder with delusions about value. It's only in this preview because we legally have to auction everything from the collection. So you haven't looked at it. I've done better than look at it. I've had it appraised by 3 separate experts, all of whom confirmed it's worthless. The metal might fetch a few $100s for scrap. The parts are damaged beyond repair. There's no identification, no paperwork, no provenance of any significance." "Provenance," Ethan corrected softly. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "The word is provenance, not providence." The small crowd around them went very quiet. Victoria's professional smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. "Of course. My mistake." She turned to address the growing audience. "In any case, I want to be transparent with our clients. This lot," she gestured dismissively at the race car, "has no real value. It will be sold as is with no guarantees. I strongly recommend serious collectors focus their attention on the authenticated pieces throughout the hall." The message was clear. Don't waste your money on garbage. People nodded and drifted away, returning to the paintings and antiques that actually mattered. Victoria started to leave, then paused and turned back to Ethan. "Are you a collector, Mr. Mercer?" "Ethan Mercer, and no, I'm not a collector." "Then what are you?" "A mechanic." Victoria's smile turned pitying. "Then I really would hate to see you waste your money on something that belongs in a junkyard. There are far better investment opportunities here tonight." She walked away, heels clicking, leaving Ethan standing alone beside the forgotten race car. He waited until she was completely out of sight. Then he pulled out his flashlight again and went back to work. The auction itself happened 2 days later on a Tuesday evening. The main hall had been transformed into something that looked like a theater, with rows of padded chairs facing a raised stage where items would be presented. Serious bidders sat in the front rows, their paddles numbered and registered. Behind them, curious onlookers and minor buyers filled in the remaining seats. Ethan sat in the very last row, paddle number 247 resting on his lap. He'd brought exactly $12,000 in certified funds, Every penny he could scrape together from his business account, his personal savings, and a credit card he really hoped he wouldn't regret maxing out. It was insane. It was reckless. Lily needed new clothes for school. The garage needed a new compressor. His truck needed new tires. But he couldn't shake what he'd seen. Those welds. Those materials. Those mounting points. The auction moved quickly. Victoria Sterling presided from a podium at stage left, her voice smooth and authoritative as she introduced each lot. Items sold for staggering amounts. A painting went for $340,000. A set of antique chairs brought $89,000. A signed first edition of something Ethan had never heard of sold for $156,000. The crowd barely blinked. Then, nearly 2 hours in, they wheeled out the race car. It looked even worse under the stage lights. More pathetic, more broken, more absolutely worthless. Someone had made a half-hearted attempt to clean it, but dirt still caked the wheels and rust still bloomed across every surface. A few people in the audience actually laughed. Victoria approached the podium with the expression of someone forced to discuss an embarrassing relative. Lot 247, a vintage racing vehicle of unknown origin and undetermined age, sold as is with absolutely no warranties or guarantees. The vehicle is not running and shows extensive damage throughout. She paused, glancing at her notes as if the car wasn't worth remembering details about. We'll open bidding at $500. Silence. Victoria waited. Do I have $500? Nothing. The minimum bid is $500 for those interested. More silence. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered something that drew quiet laughter. Ethan raised his paddle. Victoria's eyes found him in the back row, and for just a moment her professional composure slipped. She looked surprised, then annoyed, then something else. Was that concern? We have 500 from paddle 247, she said carefully. Do I have 600? Nothing. Fair warning then, selling at 500 to paddle 247, 11,000. Ethan's voice carried across the silent auction hall. People turned in their seats to stare at him. The number made no sense. You didn't jump from 500 to 11,000 for a piece of junk. You just didn't. Victoria's knuckles went white on the podium. Sir, are you certain? $11,000, Ethan repeated clearly. She looked around the room, clearly hoping someone would outbid this insanity and restore order to the universe. Nobody moved. Nobody wanted this car at 500, let alone 11,000. Lot 247 going once at $11,000 to paddle 247. Victoria's eyes met Ethan's across the distance. He couldn't quite read her expression. Confusion? Anger? Something else? Lot 247 going twice at $11,000. Ethan kept his paddle raised. Sold. Paddle 247 for $11,000. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that felt like punctuation at the end of a sentence Ethan couldn't take back. He'd just spent every available dollar he had on a car that Manhattan's top auction house had declared worthless. The woman sitting next to him leaned over and whispered, "Are you okay? Do you need medical attention?" Ethan didn't answer. He was too busy doing math in his head, calculating exactly how many ramen noodles he and Lily would be eating for the next 6 months. Dissecting. 3 days later, Ethan stood in his garage at 2:47 in the morning, staring at the race car under the harsh glow of LED work lights. Lily was asleep upstairs, her nightlight casting soft shadows on the ceiling above her small bed. She'd asked about the car when Ethan had it delivered. "Is it a race car, Daddy? Can we race it?" And Ethan had promised they'd make it beautiful again. He hoped that wasn't a lie. The garage was small, cluttered, and smelled like decades of motor oil, metal shavings, and honest work. Tools hung on pegboards, parts bins lined metal shelves. A rolling toolbox, older than Ethan but maintained with religious care, sat within arm's reach of the car. Ethan had already spent the last 2 days doing preliminary work. He documented everything with photographs. He'd carefully removed the damaged body panels, cataloging each piece. He'd drained the old fluids, checked the brake lines, inspected the fuel system. Now came the real work. He started with the engine. It was worse than he'd thought. Someone had tried to rebuild it at some point and done a spectacularly terrible job. Wrong gaskets, mismatched bolts, a carburetor that didn't belong anywhere near this type of motor. But underneath the amateur butchery, the core components were fascinating. The block itself was hand-cast aluminum alloy, unusual for anything that wasn't a high-performance racing application. The cylinder heads showed evidence of extensive port work. Someone had spent hours carefully reshaping the intake and exhaust passages to maximize airflow. This wasn't a production engine. This was built by hand by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Ethan kept digging. He pulled the transmission, a 4-speed manual that had been modified with custom gear ratios. He traced every wire in the electrical system, finding hand-soldered connections and individually labeled circuits. He examined the fuel cell, the oil cooler, the brake master cylinder. Every single component told the same story. This car had been built by someone exceptional. But who? And when? And why did nobody know about it? At 4:15 a.m., Ethan found the first real clue. He was lying on his back underneath the chassis, inspecting the frame rails with his flashlight, when he noticed something odd about one of the cross-member joints. The weld looked normal at first glance, but when he shifted his angle, he could see marks underneath the rust and grime. Stamped numbers. His heart rate picked up. He grabbed a wire brush and carefully, very carefully, cleaned the area around the marks. The rust fought him, decades of oxidation protecting whatever secret lay beneath. He switched to a chemical rust remover, applying it with a cotton swab, working slowly to avoid damaging anything. 20 minutes later, he could read them clearly. A serial number, a date code, and something else, a symbol he didn't recognize. It looked like a bird, maybe? An eagle with its wings spread? Ethan sat up so fast he cracked his head on the differential housing. Shit! He rubbed his skull, stars dancing in his vision, but he didn't care about the pain. He was too busy thinking. That symbol, he'd seen it before. Where? He grabbed his phone and started searching. Vintage race car symbols. American racing emblems, 1950s. Custom automotive manufacturer logos. Nothing matched. He tried different searches, different combinations of words. His coffee went cold beside him. His eyes burned from staring at the phone screen. Then, on the 37th search result of the 4th different query, he found it. An old black and white photograph on an automotive history website. A group of men standing beside a stripped-down race car in what looked like a workshop. The car's fender displayed a painted emblem, an eagle with spread wings. The caption read, Adrian Cole Sr. and team with prototype racer, 1959, exact whereabouts unknown. Ethan read the caption again, then again. Adrian Cole Sr. He knew that name. Everyone in the automotive history world knew that name. Cole had been a legendary engineer in the 50s and 60s, designing everything from Le Mans racers to experimental prototypes that pushed the boundaries of what was mechanically possible. He'd also died in 1973, and most of his work had been lost or destroyed. According to the article, Cole had been developing a revolutionary race car just before his death, something that was supposed to represent the pinnacle of his career. But the project had never been completed. The prototype had allegedly been destroyed in a warehouse fire in 1974, along with all the documentation and plans. Everyone assumed it was gone forever. Ethan looked at the car sitting in his garage. He looked at the photograph on his phone. He looked at the serial number stamped into the chassis. No, he whispered to the empty garage. No way. But the numbers didn't lie. The construction didn't lie. The materials, the methods, the attention to detail, it all pointed to exactly one conclusion. Ethan had just bought Adrian Cole's lost prototype for $11,000. The car everyone thought was destroyed 40 years ago was currently sitting in a garage in Brooklyn, covered in rust and dismissed as scrap metal by one of Manhattan's top auction houses. Ethan sat down hard on his rolling stool, his mind racing through the implications. If this was real, and every piece of evidence suggested it was, then this car wasn't worth $11,000. It was worth millions. His phone buzzed, a text from the garage's landlord about next month's rent. Another reminder that money was tight, that every dollar mattered, that he was barely keeping his head above water. Ethan looked at the car again. He could sell it right now. Find a private collector, make a quiet deal, walk away with enough money to secure Lily's future and never worry about rent again. But he'd have to prove it first, and proof meant authentication, documentation, expert verification, which meant calling people who actually knew what they were looking at. Ethan pulled up the automotive history website again and found a contact section. There was an email address for historical inquiries and a name, Dr. Adrian Cole, Jr., Director of Automotive Heritage Studies. The son. Adrian Cole's son was still alive and apparently running some kind of historical preservation organization. Ethan checked the time. 5:23 a.m. Too early to call. Way too early. He composed an email instead. Subject. Possible. Adrian Cole. Senior Prototype Identification. Dr. Cole, my name is Ethan Mercer. I'm a mechanic in Brooklyn, and I recently acquired a vehicle that shows some unusual characteristics consistent with your father's work. I found what appears to be an authentication mark and serial number that may connect to the prototype racer that was supposedly destroyed in 1974. I know this sounds crazy. I know people probably contact you all the time claiming they found something important, but I'm attaching photographs of the chassis markings, frame construction, and engine components. If you have any time to look at them, I'd appreciate your professional opinion. I'm not trying to waste your time. I just need to know if I'm seeing what I think I'm seeing. Respectfully, Ethan Mercer. He attached 17 high-resolution photographs showing every detail he documented, then read the email 3 times before hitting send. The response came in 43 minutes. Mr. Mercer, I need to see this vehicle in person immediately. Where are you located? I can drive down from Hartford today. Adrian Cole. Ethan read the email twice, his heart hammering. Dr. Cole, Mercer's Auto Repair, 847 43rd Street, Brooklyn. I'm here all day. The response took less than a minute. Be there by 11 a.m. Adrian Cole Jr. was 71 years old, rail-thin, and arrived at exactly 10:58 a.m., driving a vintage Mercedes sedan that was older than Ethan. He climbed out slowly, his movements careful but determined, and looked at the garage's faded sign with an expression Ethan couldn't quite read. Mr. Mercer? Dr. Cole, thanks for coming. They shook hands. Cole's grip was surprisingly strong. Show me, Cole said simply. Ethan led him into the garage where the race car sat under the work lights, still partially disassembled from Ethan's examination. Cole stopped in the doorway, his entire body going rigid. He didn't move for almost 30 seconds. Then, slowly, he walked forward. His hand rose, trembling slightly, and touched the car's frame with something approaching reverence. My God, he whispered, it's real. Over the next 4 hours, Adrian Cole examined every inch of the vehicle with an intensity that reminded Ethan of a surgeon performing delicate operations. He measured components. He photographed markings. He cross-referenced numbers against a leather journal he'd brought from his car. His father's original engineering notes, preserved for half a century. Ethan made coffee and watched quietly, afraid to interrupt. Finally, Cole straightened up, his eyes wet. This is it, he said, his voice rough. This is the Phoenix Project, my father's masterpiece, the car that was supposed to change everything. I thought it burned in a warehouse fire. Cole shook his head. That's what everyone believed, but my father was paranoid about his work being stolen. He kept 3 different workshop locations. The warehouse that burned? That was a decoy facility where he stored old prototypes and paperwork. This car, the real prototype, was somewhere else entirely. After he died, it must have been sold off by someone who didn't know what they had. How much do you think it's worth? Cole looked at him with an expression that was equal parts excitement and sorrow. Conservatively, $8 million. Maybe more if the right buyers get involved. This is automotive history, Mr. Mercer. This is the Holy Grail. $8 million. Ethan sat down on his rolling stool again, his legs suddenly unreliable. What do you want to do? Cole asked carefully. This is your property, your discovery, but I can help you authenticate it properly, document everything, find the right buyers. This deserves to be preserved, not hidden in a garage. What would your father want? Cole smiled sadly. He'd want it to be remembered, to prove he was right, to show the world what he built. Ethan thought about Lily upstairs, about rent payments and college funds and all the practical reasons to take the money and run. Then he thought about his own father, Thomas Mercer, and the lessons about looking deeper, seeing what others missed, doing the work right, even when nobody was watching. Let's authenticate it properly, Ethan said. Let's do this the right way. Cole extended his hand again. It would be my honor. They shook on it, and somewhere in the back of Ethan's mind, a small voice whispered that he'd just made a decision that would change everything. He had no idea how right that voice was. News traveled fast in the collector world. Within a week, rumors were circulating about a major automotive discovery in New York. Within 2 weeks, serious collectors were calling Ethan's cell phone at all hours. Within 3 weeks, lawyers had gotten involved. That's when Damien Cross showed up. He arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in a black SUV with tinted windows, flanked by 2 associates who looked like they'd been hired for intimidation more than expertise. Ethan was in the garage changing oil on a customer's Civic when Cross walked in without knocking. "Ethan Mercer?" Ethan looked up from under the Honda. "Garage is closed to visitors. My name is Damien Cross. I'm a private collector, and I'm here to make you an offer you should seriously consider." Ethan slid out from under the car, wiping his hands on a rag. Cross was maybe 50, expensively dressed, and carried himself with the aggressive confidence of someone used to buying whatever he wanted. "Not interested in selling," Ethan said flatly. "You haven't heard my offer." "Don't need to. The car's going to auction." Cross's smile was cold. "Auction takes time. Auction involves fees, publicity, complications. I'm offering you $4 million, cash, right now. You sign the paperwork, the money's in your account tomorrow, and you never have to deal with any of this again." $4 million. Ethan's brain did the math automatically. Life-changing money. Lily's entire future secured, the garage expanded, every financial pressure gone. "No," he said. Cross's smile disappeared. "Excuse me? The car's worth more than $4 million, and we both know it. You're trying to buy it cheap before the full authentication goes public. The answer's no." "I'm trying to save you headaches, Mr. Mercer. You're a mechanic, not a player in the collector world. You have no idea how ugly these auctions can get. People will come after you. Lawyers will question your ownership. The IRS will crawl up your ass so far you'll get out of my garage." Cross didn't move. $5 million, final offer. "I said get out." The 2 associates stepped forward slightly. Ethan set down his rag and straightened up to his full height. He wasn't a big man, but he'd grown up in Brooklyn and spent 15 years working on cars with his hands. He didn't back down easy. "You're making a mistake," Cross said quietly. "People who don't know their place get hurt in this world." "Noted. Now leave before I call the cops." Cross stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked out. His associates followed. The SUV pulled away, but Ethan had a sinking feeling this wasn't over. He was right. Over the next week, things escalated. A lawyer showed up claiming Ethan's purchase of the car was fraudulent because the auction house hadn't properly disclosed its value. An insurance investigator appeared asking questions about potential theft. Someone tried to break into the garage late one night. Ethan had upgraded the locks just in time. The pressure was deliberate, designed to make him crack, take a quick payout, and make the problem go away. Ethan refused. Not because he was stubborn, though he was. Not because he liked the fight, though part of him did. But because his father had taught him something important. When you find something valuable that everyone else overlooked, you don't let them bully you into giving it up cheap. You hold your ground. You do the work. You see it through. On Friday evening, while Lily colored at the small desk in the corner of the garage, Ethan's phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Mr. Mercer, this is Victoria Sterling." Ethan nearly dropped the phone. "Ms. Sterling, I wanted to call personally to discuss the situation with the vehicle you purchased." Her voice was professional, controlled, but Ethan could hear something underneath. Tension, maybe? Embarrassment? "I'm listening." "I've been made aware of the authentication results. I've reviewed Dr. Cole's findings. I've consulted with our legal team and our board of directors. And I need to apologize." Silence. Victoria continued, her voice quieter now. "I made an assessment based on surface appearance without proper due diligence. I dismissed your interest in the vehicle without understanding what you were seeing. I was wrong, and my error cost this auction house a significant commission on what should have been one of our most important sales of the decade." "You're apologizing for losing money?" "I'm apologizing for being dismissive, for assuming I knew better, for—" She paused. "For judging you based on appearance rather than knowledge." Ethan didn't know what to say. Victoria Sterling didn't seem like someone who apologized often. I'd like to propose something, she continued. Let Sterling Elite handle the auction. We'll waive half our commission as compensation for the initial misidentification. We'll organize a special event, invite international buyers, ensure you receive maximum value for the vehicle, and I'll personally oversee every aspect to make sure it's done right. Why would you do that? Because it's the right thing to do, and because... Another pause. Because I don't like being wrong, Mr. Mercer. I don't like the idea that the car I called scrap metal in front of a room full of people is actually worth $8 million. I'd like the chance to fix that. Ethan thought about it. He could go with another auction house. Plenty had reached out. But Victoria's offer was good, and more importantly, it felt honest. Okay, he said finally, but I have conditions. Name them. First, the auction happens in 6 weeks. Gives us time to finish the authentication and do proper documentation. Second, Dr. Cole is involved in every step. His expertise, his father's legacy, all of it gets proper recognition. Third, I want full transparency on buyer identities. No shell corporations, no anonymous bidders. I want to know who's trying to own this car. Agreed. Anything else? Yeah. When this is over, win or lose, you and I have a conversation about how you run previews. Because the next mechanic who walks into your auction house deserves better than being laughed at for actually looking at something nobody else bothered to examine. More silence on the other end. Then, agreed, Mr. Mercer. That's fair. They worked out the details and ended the call. Ethan set his phone down and looked at the race car. Still disassembled, still covered in decades of neglect, but now properly recognized for what it truly was. A masterpiece hiding in plain sight. Lily looked up from her coloring. Daddy, is the race car going to make us rich? Ethan smiled at his daughter. Maybe, sweetheart, but you know what's better than being rich? What? Being right when everyone else is wrong. Lily thought about that, then went back to her coloring. She was drawing a race car, a beautiful one with perfect wheels and bright colors, and a driver who looked suspiciously like her dad. Outside, Brooklyn settled into evening. Cars honked. Sirens wailed in the distance. The city kept moving, indifferent to the small garage where an ordinary mechanic had found something extraordinary. And in 6 weeks, the world was going to find out exactly what that meant. The next morning started with coffee that tasted like burnt disappointment and a phone call Ethan should have expected, but somehow didn't. Mr. Mercer, this is Janet Klein from the New York Times. I'm doing a piece on the Adrian Cole discovery, and I'd love to get your perspective on... Ethan hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Different number. Ethan Mercer? This is Marcus Webb from Automotive Classics magazine. We'd like to feature... He hung up again. By 9 a.m., he'd stopped answering calls from numbers he didn't recognize. By 10 a.m., there were 3 reporters standing outside the garage with cameras. By noon, Ethan had taped cardboard over the front windows and was seriously considering just living in the building until this whole thing blew over. Daddy, why are those people taking pictures of our garage? Lily stood at the top of the interior stairs, still in her pajamas, holding her stuffed rabbit by one worn ear. She was supposed to be getting ready for school, but the commotion outside had distracted her. They're interested in the car, sweetheart. The rusty one? Yeah. Turns out it's pretty special. Lily came down the stairs carefully, one step at a time, and peered through a gap in the cardboard. They don't look happy. They're just doing their jobs. Their jobs look annoying. Ethan couldn't help but smile. Go get dressed. Mrs. Chen's picking you up in 20 minutes. Mrs. Chen was their neighbor, a retired teacher who watched Lily after school and sometimes helped with morning drop-offs when Ethan had early appointments. She was also one of the few people in the neighborhood who didn't ask too many questions, which Ethan appreciated more than ever right now. After Lily left for school, Ethan tried to focus on actual work. He had 3 cars waiting for repairs, invoices to send, parts to order. Normal life didn't stop just because he'd accidentally stumbled into automotive history. But normal life was getting harder to maintain. Around 1 p.m., Adrian Cole called. Have you seen the articles? I'm trying not to. Probably wise. The speculation is getting wild. I've had 4 different collectors contact me claiming they have documentation proving ownership rights to the car. Ethan's stomach tightened. Can they actually do that? No, your purchase was legitimate, but they'll try anyway because that's what people do when this much money is involved. How are you holding up? I've had better weeks. Cole's laugh was dry. I imagine so. Listen, I'm driving down tomorrow with the final authentication documents. Everything's been verified, cross-referenced, and certified by 3 independent experts. The car is absolutely, without question, my father's Phoenix Project prototype. And its worth? Somewhere between 8 and 10 million, depending on the buyer. Could go higher if we get the right people in the room. $10 million. The number still didn't feel real. Ethan looked around his small, cluttered garage with its ancient tools and cracked concrete floor. $10 million was more money than would pass through this building in 100 years of oil changes and brake jobs. Ethan, I need to ask you something. Cole's voice had changed, become more serious. Are you absolutely sure you want to go through with the public auction? Because once this goes live, your life changes. Privacy goes away. Every decision gets scrutinized. People will treat you differently. You think I should take a private offer? I think you should do whatever keeps you and your daughter safe and happy. The money's important, but it's not everything. Ethan thought about Damian Cross and his cold smile, about the reporters outside, about the way his phone hadn't stopped ringing for 2 days. Then he thought about his father's voice. When you find something valuable that everyone else overlooked, you hold your ground. We go through with the auction, Ethan said. The right way. Then we'll make sure it's done properly. I'll see you tomorrow. After they hung up, Ethan walked over to where the race car sat, now partially reassembled. He'd spent hours cleaning components, cataloging parts, documenting every detail. The work was meditative, familiar. It reminded him why he'd become a mechanic in the first place. Because cars made sense. People were complicated, unpredictable, often disappointing. But cars? Cars were honest. They broke in specific ways for specific reasons. Fixed the problem, the car worked. Simple. Except nothing about this situation was simple anymore. The cardboard covering the front window rustled. Someone was trying to peek through a gap. Ethan walked over and pulled the cardboard tighter, securing it with more tape. He heard muffled conversation outside, then footsteps moving away. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria Sterling. Press is getting aggressive. I'm arranging security for the vehicle and your property. They'll arrive tonight. Don't argue. Ethan started typing a response about not needing security, then deleted it. She was right. He did need security. This whole situation was spiraling into something he couldn't control alone. Thank you, he texted back. The response came immediately. This is partially my fault. I'm fixing it. Ethan stared at that message for a long moment. Victoria Sterling taking responsibility for something wasn't what he'd expected. People like her, wealthy, powerful, born into the right circles, they didn't usually admit fault. They definitely didn't help fix problems for mechanics from Brooklyn. But here she was, doing exactly that. Maybe he'd misjudged her. Or maybe she was just protecting her auction house's reputation. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. The afternoon crawled by with painful slowness. Ethan managed to finish the brake job on a Toyota and started diagnosing a check engine light on a Ford, but his concentration was shot. Every car that drove past made him look up. Every pedestrian that slowed down near the garage made him tense. He hated feeling this way, paranoid, jumpy, constantly waiting for the next problem. At 4:30 p.m., Mrs. Chen brought Lily home. The older woman looked concerned. There were photographers at the school, she said quietly, while Lily ran upstairs to drop off her backpack. They were asking other parents about you. I'm sorry you got dragged into this. Mrs. Chen waved a dismissive hand. I told them nothing, but Ethan, you need to be careful. People are talking. Some good things, some not so good. What kind of not so good? Oh, the kind where people wonder how a mechanic could afford an $11,000 car when he's always late on rent. The kind where they ask if maybe you knew what it was worth all along. Ethan's jaw tightened. I didn't. I know that. I know you. But other people? They see money, and they create stories. After Mrs. Chen left, Ethan made dinner, spaghetti with jarred sauce, the same meal they ate 3 times a week because it was cheap, and Lily actually liked it. They ate at the small table in the apartment upstairs while Lily chattered about school, about her friend Emma's new pencil case, about the substitute teacher who let them have extra recess. Normal kid stuff, normal life. Ethan held on to that normalcy like a lifeline. At 7 p.m., a black sedan pulled up outside. 2 men in suits got out, surveyed the street with professional efficiency, then approached the garage. Ethan met them at the door. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Davis. This is Chen. Sterling Elite sent us to provide security." They were polite, professional, and clearly former military or law enforcement. Davis was tall and broad-shouldered. Chen was shorter but moved with the kind of controlled precision that suggested serious training. "We'll be outside in the vehicle overnight," Davis explained. 12-hour shifts, rotating team. Nobody gets in without your explicit permission. This seems excessive. You have an $8 million car in a garage in Brooklyn with minimal security infrastructure. This is actually the minimum. Hard to argue with that logic. The security team settled in, and Ethan went back upstairs. He helped Lily with her homework, second-grade math problems that somehow seemed harder than they should be, then read her 2 chapters of the book they were working through together. She fell asleep halfway through the second chapter, her breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of childhood sleep. Ethan sat there for a while watching her. This was what mattered. Not the car, not the money, not the reporters or the lawyers or any of it. This small person who trusted him completely to keep her safe and fed and loved. He was terrified of screwing it up. Downstairs, his phone buzzed with another call. He'd left it in the garage. Probably another reporter. He ignored it and stayed with Lily until he was sure she was deeply asleep, then carefully extracted himself from her room and headed back down to the garage. The missed call was from Victoria Sterling. She'd left a voicemail. "Mr. Mercer, I wanted to update you on the auction preparations. We've set the date for 6 weeks from tomorrow. We're planning a special evening event, invitation only, with pre-qualified bidders. I'm also arranging for the car to be featured in 3 major automotive publications before the sale. Dr. Cole has agreed to write the historical authentication for the catalog. Everything is moving forward smoothly. Call me if you have questions." Professional, efficient, exactly what he'd expect from someone like her. Ethan walked over to the race car and ran his hand along the frame. Someone had built this with their bare hands 65 years ago. Someone had welded every joint, shaped every panel, calibrated every component. Adrian Cole Sr. had poured his knowledge and skill into this machine, trying to create something extraordinary. And then it had vanished for decades, forgotten, dismissed, nearly destroyed. Until a mechanic from Brooklyn looked closer than anyone else bothered to. Ethan's phone rang again. This time he recognized the number. His landlord, Marcus Petrov. "Marcus, hey. Ethan, we need to talk about the garage." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What about it?" "I'm getting calls. Reporters, lawyers, people asking about the building, about you, about whether the space is for sale. Someone offered me 3 times market value to break your lease early." "You can't be serious." I told them no. "You've been a good tenant, you pay on time, mostly, and I'm not in the business of screwing people over, but Ethan, this situation is getting complicated." "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't apologize. Just tell me this is going to settle down after the auction." "It will. 6 weeks and this is over." 6 weeks, Marcus repeated. "Okay, I can handle 6 weeks. But if this turns into a permanent circus, we're going to need to renegotiate terms." After hanging up, Ethan sat down on his rolling stool and put his head in his hands. This was supposed to be simple. Find a cool car, fix it up, maybe make some money. Instead, it had become this sprawling, complicated mess that was touching every part of his life. A knock on the garage door made him look up. Through the small window, he could see Davis from the security team. Ethan opened the door. "Problem?" "Photographer tried to get shots through the side window. We convinced him to leave, but he'll probably be back tomorrow with friends." "Great. You might want to consider moving the vehicle to a secure facility until the auction." "This is my garage. I'm not giving that up." Davis nodded slowly. "Understood. We'll keep the perimeter secure." After he left, Ethan tried to do some actual work, but his heart wasn't in it. He gave up around 11 p.m. and headed upstairs, checking on Lily one more time before collapsing into his own bed. Sleep came slowly, interrupted by stress dreams about reporters and lawyers and cars that fell apart in his hands. The next 3 weeks were a blur of controlled chaos. Adrian Cole came and went, bringing documentation, answering questions from experts, handling the technical side of authentication. Victoria Sterling coordinated with publications, arranged photography sessions, dealt with potential bidders. Ethan tried to maintain some semblance of normal life, fixing cars during the day, helping with homework at night, pretending everything was fine. It wasn't fine. The reporters eventually got bored and left, but the pressure from collectors intensified. Damian Cross called twice more, each time increasing his offer. Other buyers approached with proposals that ranged from legitimate to borderline criminal. Someone suggested Ethan might want to consider alternative financing arrangements. Someone else implied that accidents happen to valuable cars all the time. The security team stayed posted outside 24 hours a day. Meanwhile, the automotive world was losing its collective mind. Articles appeared in every major publication. Forums exploded with debate about the car's authenticity, with keyboard experts dissecting every photograph and declaring confidently that it was either the real deal or an elaborate hoax. Conspiracy theories emerged. Someone claimed the warehouse fire in 1974 was actually an insurance fraud scheme. Someone else insisted Adrian Cole Sr. had actually built 3 prototypes, not one. The noise was overwhelming. Through it all, Ethan kept his head down and did what he knew how to do. He worked. He finished reassembling the car properly, replacing damaged components with period-correct parts, cleaning and preserving the original elements. It was meticulous, painstaking work that required absolute focus. It was also the only thing keeping him sane. 4 weeks before the auction, Victoria Sterling showed up at the garage unannounced. Ethan was underneath a Honda Accord, replacing a leaking oil pan when he heard expensive heels clicking across the concrete floor. He slid out from under the car, wiping grease from his hands. Victoria stood there in another perfect suit, looking as out of place as ever in the cluttered garage. But something was different this time. She seemed less certain, less armored. "Ms. Sterling, we have a meeting I forgot about?" "No, I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check on the car's progress." "You were in Sunset Park? In Brooklyn?" A slight smile touched her lips. "Okay, I wasn't in the neighborhood. I drove here specifically. May I see it?" Ethan gestured toward the back of the garage where the race car sat, now mostly reassembled and looking dramatically better than it had 6 weeks ago. The rust had been treated and preserved rather than removed. Cleaning it too much would destroy the authenticity. But the overall structure was now clearly visible as the masterpiece it was. Victoria approached slowly, her expression shifting as she took in the details. She crouched down, carefully, so as not to damage her suit, and examined one of the custom suspension mounting points. "I looked right at this," she said quietly. "That day at the preview. I walked past it 3 times and never saw any of this. Most people don't. You did. I had practice. My father used to make me inspect cars with him when I was a kid. He'd point at something and ask what I saw. I'd describe it, and he'd say, 'Look closer. What are you missing?' We'd do that for hours." Victoria stood up, brushing invisible dust from her skirt. "He taught you well." "He taught me to pay attention. Turns out that's a useful skill." They stood there in awkward silence for a moment. Outside, traffic hummed past. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm went off and then stopped. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said finally. "The board at Sterling Elite wanted to back out of this auction. They argued that the initial misidentification created too much liability risk. They wanted me to recommend you take the car to Sotheby's or Christie's, let someone else handle the potential blowback." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "What did you say?" "I said no. I told them this was our mistake to fix, our opportunity to demonstrate integrity, and our chance to prove that Sterling Elite handles difficult situations properly. I threatened to resign if they pulled out." "You didn't have to do that." "Actually, I did. Because you were right that night on the phone. The way I treated you at the preview, dismissive, condescending, assuming I knew better without actually doing the work, that's everything wrong with how people like me operate. I don't want to be that person anymore." Ethan didn't know what to say. Victoria Sterling admitting she was wrong was one thing. Victoria Sterling fundamentally questioning how she approached her entire professional life was something else entirely. "The auction's still happening?" he asked. "The auction's still happening, and it's going to be the most professional, well-executed sale Sterling Elite has ever produced. Not because I want to save face, but because you deserve that. Because this car deserves that." She pulled an envelope from her bag and handed it to him. "This is the preliminary catalog entry. I wanted you to see it before publication." Ethan opened the envelope and read the description. It was thorough, accurate, and written with genuine respect for both the car and the story of its discovery. There was no mention of the initial dismissal, no attempt to rewrite history, just honest documentation of what the car was and how it had been found. "This is good," he said. Dr. Cole helped. He's quite passionate about his father's legacy. "Yeah, I've noticed." Victoria checked her watch, a slim, expensive piece that probably cost more than Ethan's truck, and seemed about to leave. Then she hesitated. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "When you bought this car, knowing everyone thought it was worthless, knowing you were spending money you probably didn't have, what made you so certain you were right?" Ethan thought about that. "I wasn't certain. I was pretty sure I'd just made a huge mistake, actually. But I kept thinking about all the work someone had put into building it, all the custom fabrication, the hand welding, the attention to detail. Someone cared about this car enough to build it by hand. That had to mean something." "So you took a chance?" "I took a chance on the work being worth more than appearances suggested. Turns out I was right. But I could have just as easily been wrong." Victoria nodded slowly, processing that. "Thank you for being honest." After she left, Ethan stood there for a while thinking about that conversation, about the strange arc of how they'd started, her looking down at him like he was an annoyance, and where they were now, having actual conversations about value and judgment and integrity. People were complicated. Sometimes they surprised you. The following week, the catalog went public. Within hours, confirmed bids started arriving from collectors around the world. A museum in Stuttgart expressed interest. A private buyer in Dubai requested additional documentation. A consortium of American automotive historians made a preliminary offer. The attention was intense, but more professional now, filtered through Victoria's office and handled with appropriate discretion. Ethan appreciated that more than he'd expected. 2 weeks before the auction, Damien Cross made one final approach. He didn't come to the garage this time. Instead, he called from an unknown number while Ethan was picking Lily up from school. $7 million, Mr. Mercer, cash, right now. You avoid the auction fees, the publicity, the risk that something goes wrong. Ethan watched Lily emerge from the school building, her backpack bouncing, her smile bright as she spotted him waiting by the pickup area. "Not interested," he said. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." He hung up and opened the truck door for Lily as she bounded over. "Who was that?" she asked, climbing into her booster seat. "Nobody important." "Can we get ice cream? It's 40 degrees outside." "Ice cream doesn't care about temperature, Daddy." Ethan laughed despite everything. "Fair point. Yeah, we can get ice cream." They drove to the corner store and got 2 cones, chocolate for Lily, vanilla for Ethan, and sat in the truck eating them while the heater ran and people hurried past on the sidewalk outside. "Daddy, when you sell the race car, are we going to be rich?" "Probably." "What's that like?" "I have no idea, sweetheart." Lily thought about that, licking melting ice cream from her fingers. "Will we still live above the garage?" "Do you want to?" "Yeah, I like it there. My room is nice, and I can hear you working downstairs at night. It's like you're always close." Something in Ethan's chest squeezed tight. "Then we'll stay above the garage." "Even if we're rich?" "Even if we're rich." Lily smiled, satisfied with that answer, and went back to her ice cream. That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan sat in the garage and finally let himself think about what was actually about to happen. In 2 weeks, the car would be gone. The money would arrive. His life would change in ways he couldn't fully predict, and he had no idea if he was ready for any of it. The race car sat under the lights. Beautiful now, in a way that had nothing to do with perfection. It was scarred, weathered, marked by decades of neglect and survival. But underneath all that damage was something extraordinary. The vision of a man who tried to build something that mattered. Adrian Cole Sr. had succeeded. The car was a masterpiece, and Ethan had been the one to recognize it when everyone else looked away. His phone buzzed. A text from Adrian Cole Jr. "Final documentation completed. Everything's certified and ready. 2 weeks until history gets made. How are you holding up?" Ethan typed back, "Still breathing? That counts for something." The response came quickly. "It counts for everything. Get some rest. The hard part's almost over." Ethan wasn't sure he believed that, but he appreciated the sentiment. He locked up the garage, checked the security team posted outside, and climbed the stairs to the apartment. Lily's door was open a crack, her nightlight glowing soft and steady. He stood there for a moment, listening to her breathe, grateful for this one constant thing in a world that had become unexpectedly unstable. Tomorrow, the catalog would reach more collectors. More calls would come. More pressure would build. But tonight, Lily was safe. The car was secure. And Ethan had somehow managed to hold everything together for one more day. He'd take that victory and not ask for more. The final week before the auction arrived with the subtlety of a freight train. Ethan woke up on Monday morning to find 17 missed calls, 9 voicemails, and a news van parked across the street from the garage. Apparently, one of the automotive magazines had published their feature early, complete with dramatic photographs of the car and a headline that read, "The $8 million barn find that fooled Manhattan's elite." Victoria was going to be thrilled about that phrasing. Ethan made coffee, got Lily ready for school, and tried to pretend the growing crowd outside wasn't happening. The security team had doubled overnight, 4 people now instead of 2, and they'd erected temporary barriers to keep photographers at a distance. "This is crazy," Mrs. Chen said when she arrived to pick up Lily. She had to push past 3 people with cameras just to reach the door. "You sure you're okay?" Define okay. She gave him a look that suggested he wasn't fooling anyone, then took Lily's hand and navigated back through the crowd. Ethan watched until they turned the corner, then closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted despite having been awake for less than an hour. His phone rang. "Victoria, have you seen the article?" "Good morning to you too. The headline is inflammatory and inaccurate. We didn't fool anyone. We made an honest assessment error. I'm contacting their editor to request a revision." "Does it matter? People are going to write whatever gets clicks." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "You're right. I just hate—" She stopped herself. "Never mind. How are you holding up?" "There's a news van outside my garage, and I'm pretty sure someone tried to bribe my landlord for information about my lease. So, living the dream. The transport company will be there Wednesday morning at 6 to move the car to our secure facility. That should reduce the attention at your location." Ethan had agreed to this reluctantly. The car would spend its final days before auction in Sterling Elite's climate-controlled vault, photographed and inspected by potential buyers under strict supervision. It made sense logistically, but Ethan hated the idea of being separated from it, which was stupid. It was just a car, a piece of metal and history that he'd gotten lucky enough to find, except it wasn't just a car anymore. It had become proof of something, that he wasn't just a mechanic barely scraping by, that his instincts were worth trusting, that looking closer mattered. 6 a.m. Wednesday, Ethan confirmed. "I'll be ready." After they hung up, he tried to focus on actual work. A Subaru needed a head gasket replacement. A Nissan had a mysterious electrical issue. A Toyota was due for routine maintenance. Normal problems with normal solutions. But concentration was impossible. Every few minutes, someone would knock on the door asking for a statement or requesting an interview or trying to sneak a photograph through the covered windows. The security team turned them all away, professional but firm, and Ethan felt guilty that strangers were dealing with chaos he'd accidentally created. Around noon, Adrian Cole called. "Have you eaten today?" Ethan looked at the empty coffee cup beside him. "Does coffee count?" "No, I'm bringing lunch. Don't argue." Cole arrived 40 minutes later with Chinese takeout and a determination to make sure Ethan actually consumed food. They ate in the small office area, surrounded by filing cabinets and invoices, and the comfortable clutter of a working garage. "The bidding interest is remarkable," Cole said between bites of Kung Pao chicken. "We have confirmed interest from 14 serious buyers, including 3 museums and a private collector in Japan who's apparently flown in specifically for this auction. That seems excessive." "This is the automotive find of the decade, Ethan. People have been searching for this car since before you were born. Of course they're flying in." Ethan pushed rice around his plate. "What if something goes wrong? Like what?" "I don't know. What if someone challenges the authentication? What if they find some paperwork that says the car actually belongs to someone else? What if—" "Stop." Cole's voice was gentle but firm. "I've verified every detail 3 times over. The car is authentic. Your purchase was legitimate, and even if someone tried to challenge it legally, they'd lose. You have nothing to worry about on that front." "Then why do I feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop?" Cole set down his fork and looked at Ethan with the kind of understanding that comes from experience. "Because your life is about to change dramatically, and change is terrifying even when it's good. You're a single father who's worked hard for everything you have. Sudden wealth doesn't feel real. It feels like a trick. Does it get easier? I have no idea. I've never had $8 million drop into my lap, but I suspect the trick is to remember who you were before the money and make sure you stay that person after. They finished lunch while Cole told stories about his father, about Adrian Sr.'s obsession with perfection, his notorious temper, his ability to visualize complex engineering solutions that seemed impossible until he built them. The car sitting in Ethan's garage represented the culmination of that genius, the project Cole Sr. had believed would cement his legacy. He died thinking it was lost, Cole said quietly, thinking his greatest work had burned up in that warehouse fire. I've spent 40 years believing the same thing. Getting to see it again, getting to touch something my father built. His voice caught slightly. Thank you for finding it, for recognizing what it was. I just look closer than other people. Exactly. That's not a small thing, Ethan. After Cole left, Ethan stood in the garage alone with the race car, running his hand along the frame one more time. In 2 days, it would be gone. Transported to Manhattan, locked in a vault, displayed for wealthy buyers who would see it as an investment or a trophy. Part of him wondered if any of them would actually understand what they were looking at. Tuesday brought another wave of media attention, this time triggered by a television segment that aired during morning news. Ethan didn't watch it, but apparently it featured interviews with automotive experts discussing the car's significance and speculating about the final sale price. One expert predicted it could reach $12 million if the right bidders competed aggressively. $12 million. The number had lost all meaning. It was just noise now, abstract and disconnected from actual life. Ethan spent the day finishing up his pending repair work, determined to clear his schedule completely before the auction. If things went as planned, and that was a big if, he'd need time after the sale to figure out what came next. Maybe expand the garage. Maybe hire help. Maybe take Lily on an actual vacation to somewhere that wasn't the public library or the park. Maybe just breathe for a while without constantly calculating whether he could afford groceries and rent in the same week. Around 3 in the afternoon, his lawyer called. Ethan had hired someone a few weeks back, a no-nonsense attorney named Sarah Martinez who specialized in contract law and didn't seem impressed by anyone. I've reviewed the Sterling Elite auction agreement, she said without preamble. Everything looks standard. Commission structure is fair, especially with the reduction they offered. Insurance coverage is appropriate. Payment terms are acceptable. So I just sign it? I'd recommend one small addition, a clause specifying that if the car doesn't sell, you retain all rights, and Sterling Elite covers the cost of return transport. Unlikely scenario, but worth protecting yourself. You think it might not sell? No, I think it'll sell for an obscene amount of money, and you'll spend the next year figuring out how to deal with sudden wealth. But I'm paid to think about worst-case scenarios. Ethan appreciated that kind of practical pessimism. Add the clause. Send me the revised version. Already done. Check your email. After signing the paperwork electronically, Ethan picked up Lily from Mrs. Chen's apartment and took her to the small playground 3 blocks away. It was cold enough that their breath fogged in the air, but Lily didn't care. She climbed the jungle gym with fearless determination while Ethan sat on a bench and tried not to check his phone every 30 seconds. Daddy, watch this! Lily hung upside down from a bar, her coat falling around her ears, grinning like this was the greatest achievement in human history. Very impressive, sweetheart. Don't fall. I won't fall. I'm an expert. She was 6. She was definitely not an expert, but Ethan had learned that sometimes you just had to trust kids to know their own limits. A few minutes later, she climbed down and ran over, her cheeks flushed from cold and exertion. Can I ask you something? Always. When we get the money from the car, can we get a better apartment? Ethan's chest tightened. You don't like our apartment? I like it fine, but Emma's apartment has 2 bathrooms and her bedroom has a window that looks at trees instead of the street. That seems nice. Would you want to move away from the garage? Lily considered this seriously. No, I like living where you work, but maybe we could make our apartment nicer, like get a couch that doesn't have that weird smell. Ethan laughed despite himself. The couch doesn't smell weird. It smells like old people in sadness, Daddy. Where did you even learn that phrase? Emma said it. Emma sounds like a very opinionated kid. She is. Can we get a new couch?
Yeah, sweetheart, we can get a new couch. Lily hugged him suddenly, fiercely, her small arms tight around his waist. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Lil.
They stayed at the playground until the sun started setting and the temperature dropped enough that even Lily admitted she was cold. Walking back to the garage, Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the constant anxiety that had been his companion for weeks. Whatever happened with the auction, they'd be okay. He'd make sure of it. Wednesday morning arrived dark and cold. Ethan was awake at 5, drinking coffee and watching the street through the window as the transport truck arrived precisely at 6. It was a massive enclosed trailer, the kind used for moving exotic cars worth more than most houses. 3 technicians emerged, along with Davis from the security team and someone Ethan didn't recognize carrying a clipboard. The loading process took almost an hour. They used specialized ramps, soft straps, and moved with the kind of careful precision usually reserved for handling live explosives. Ethan supervised, answering questions about the car's condition and signing various documents confirming the transfer. Victoria arrived halfway through, stepping out of a black town car and immediately conferring with the transport supervisor. She was dressed for business, sharp suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back, and moved through the organized chaos with absolute authority. Everything's proceeding smoothly, she told Ethan. The car will be in our vault by 8. We'll begin controlled viewings for pre-qualified bidders tomorrow. How many people want to see it? 17 have requested appointments so far. We're limiting viewings to 30 minutes each, with maximum 2 people per session. Ethan watched as the technicians secured the final straps, triple-checking every connection point. The race car sat in the trailer like a museum piece, dramatically lit and utterly out of context. This feels weird, he said. What does? Watching it leave. I know it's not mine anymore. Well, not for much longer. But I've spent 6 weeks with that car. Fixed it, cleaned it, documented every detail. Now it's just gone. Victoria was quiet for a moment, watching the technicians close the trailer doors. You gave it value by seeing what others missed. That doesn't disappear just because the car changes location. That's supposed to make me feel better? I don't know, does it? Ethan considered. Maybe a little. The truck pulled away at exactly 7:04 a.m., flanked by 2 security vehicles. Ethan stood on the sidewalk and watched until it turned the corner and disappeared into morning traffic. The garage felt empty now, the space where the car had been just a rectangle of cleaner concrete surrounded by oil stains and tire marks. What happens now? He asked. Now we finalize the catalog, confirm the bidder list, and prepare for Saturday. You should probably get a suit. I have a suit. Victoria looked skeptical. When's the last time you wore it? My wife's funeral, 4 years ago. Her expression softened immediately. I'm sorry. I didn't know. No reason you would. Ethan shoved his hands in his pockets, suddenly uncomfortable. Anyway, yeah, I should probably make sure it still fits. The auction starts at 7 p.m. Doors open at 6:30 for registered bidders. You can bring a guest if you'd like. Ethan thought about who he'd even invite. Mrs. Chen? His landlord? The guy who ran the parts store down the street? He didn't exactly have a long list of people who'd be comfortable at a Manhattan auction house. I'll come alone, he said. You're sure? This will be intense. Having support might help. I'll be fine. Victoria looked like she wanted to argue but decided against it. Call me if you need anything before Saturday. And Ethan, try to get some sleep. You look exhausted. After she left, Ethan went back inside and stood in the middle of the empty garage. He should work. Should catch up on the repairs he'd been neglecting. Should do literally anything productive. Instead, he just stood there, feeling the absence of something he'd never actually owned, preparing for a future he couldn't quite imagine. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended state. Ethan went through the motions, fixed cars, made meals, helped with homework, but part of his mind was always elsewhere, counting down to Saturday evening and whatever came after. Victoria called Thursday with updates. The viewings were going well. Bidder interest remained strong. Everything was proceeding according to plan. She sounded almost surprised by how smoothly things were running, as if she'd been expecting disaster and couldn't quite believe it hadn't arrived yet. Ethan understood the feeling. Friday afternoon, he drove to a department store in Manhattan and bought a new suit. Not anything fancy. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, but something that fit properly and didn't carry memories of standing beside a grave while strangers offered condolences he didn't know how to accept. The salesman tried to upsell him on shoes, a belt, a tie clip. "I'm good," Ethan said. "Just the suit." "Big event?" "Something like that." Friday night, Mrs. Chen came over to watch Lily. Ethan had explained where he'd be, at an auction in Manhattan, but had downplayed exactly what was being sold. Mrs. Chen knew about the car. Everyone in the neighborhood knew by now, but she'd been blessedly discreet about the whole situation. "You nervous?" she asked while Lily was upstairs getting ready for bed, terrified. "You'll do fine. You're a good man, Ethan. Don't forget that when all the money people start talking." He tried on the suit after she left, standing in front of the bathroom mirror and barely recognizing himself. He looked like someone who belonged in Manhattan, someone successful, someone who had their life together. The illusion was almost convincing. Saturday arrived with clear skies and temperatures just above freezing. Ethan spent the morning being completely useless, unable to focus on anything for more than a few minutes at a time. He attempted to read Lily a story and lost his place 3 times. He tried to fix breakfast and nearly burned the eggs. He started organizing his toolbox and gave up after 2 minutes. "Daddy, you're being weird," Lily observed from her spot at the kitchen table, coloring with intense concentration. "Sorry, sweetheart. Big day." "Is today when you sell the race car?" "Yeah." "Are you sad?" Ethan thought about that. "A little, but mostly just nervous." Emma's mom says being nervous means you care about something. Emma's mom is smart. "Can I come with you?" "Not tonight. It's a grown-up thing, but I promise I'll tell you everything tomorrow." Lily seemed satisfied with that answer and went back to her coloring. Ethan watched her for a moment, this small person who trusted him completely, and felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on his shoulders. Whatever happened tonight, he had to do right by her. At 4 in the afternoon, he started getting ready. Shower, shave, the new suit that still felt foreign and uncomfortable. He stared at himself in the mirror and tried to project confidence. It didn't work, but at least he looked presentable. Mrs. Chen arrived at 5. Lily hugged him extra tight before he left, making him promise to wake her up when he got home, no matter how late it was. "I want to know everything," she said seriously. "Everything might be boring." "I'll decide that." The drive into Manhattan took longer than expected. Saturday evening traffic was brutal, and Ethan spent 40 minutes creeping along in stop-and-go congestion while his anxiety ramped up to new heights. He parked in a garage 6 blocks from Sterling Elite and walked the rest of the way, his breath fogging in the cold air. The auction house looked different at night. Lit from within, elegant and imposing, it seemed designed to remind people of their place in the world's hierarchy. Ethan climbed the steps and pushed through the heavy glass doors into warmth and soft lighting and the quiet murmur of wealth. The main hall had been transformed. The regular auction setup was gone, replaced by something more intimate. Maybe 100 seats arranged in a semicircle facing a small stage. Track lighting highlighted the front area where the car would be displayed. People in expensive clothing mingled near the edges, champagne glasses in hand, speaking in hushed tones. Ethan felt immediately out of place. "Mr. Mercer." He turned to find Victoria approaching. She wore a deep blue dress that probably cost more than his truck, her hair styled in a way that looked effortless but definitely wasn't. She looked professional, commanding, and completely in her element. "You came early," she said. "Wanted to get a feel for the room." "How are you holding up?" "Ask me in 2 hours." She smiled slightly. "Fair enough. Come with me. I want you to see the car before the viewing doors open." She led him through a side corridor to a private room where the race car sat on a raised platform, dramatically lit and positioned to showcase every detail of its restoration. Someone had cleaned it again, carefully preserving the authentic patina, and the effect was stunning. It looked like a piece of art, like something that belonged in a museum rather than a garage. "We'll wheel it out at 7:15, Victoria explained. Brief presentation from Dr. Cole about the car's history and significance, then we opened bidding. "Where's Cole now?" "Giving interviews to 3 automotive journalists. He's been incredibly generous with his time." Ethan approached the car, running his hand along the frame one last time. It felt like saying goodbye to something he'd never quite had in the first place. "Second thoughts?" Victoria asked. "Just thoughts in general." "You could withdraw. It's your property until the hammer falls."
Ethan looked at her, surprised. You'd let me do that? After all this preparation? It's not about what I'd let you do. It's about what's right for you. If you're not ready, I'm ready. Just weird to watch something end, you know? Victoria nodded slowly. I do know, actually. Before Ethan could ask what she meant, someone appeared in the doorway, a staff member letting Victoria know that bidders were starting to arrive.
Time to begin, she said. You can watch from the private box on the left side of the hall. You'll have a clear view of everything without being in the spotlight. Where will you be? On stage, running the auction. Right, because Victoria Sterling wasn't just the person who'd initially dismissed the car. She was also one of the most skilled auctioneers on the East Coast. Ethan made his way to the private box, a small, elevated area with comfortable seating and a perfect sightline to the stage. From here, he could see the whole room as it filled with bidders. He recognized a few faces from photographs in automotive magazines. Others were complete strangers, wealthy people who'd flown in from around the world to compete for a piece of history. At exactly 7 p.m., the lights dimmed. The crowd settled into their seats, and Victoria walked onto the stage with the kind of confidence that made silence fall immediately. Good evening and welcome to Sterling Elite Auctions. Tonight we have the privilege of presenting one of the most significant automotive discoveries of the modern era, Adrian Cole Sr.'s Phoenix Project prototype, missing and presumed destroyed for over 40 years. The race car was wheeled out on its platform, spotlights highlighting every detail. The audience actually gasped. Ethan heard it. A collective intake of breath from people seeing the car for the first time in this context. Adrian Cole Jr. walked onto the stage, and Ethan could see emotion written across the older man's face. For the next 10 minutes, Cole spoke about his father's vision, the car's construction, the revolutionary engineering that made it unique. He spoke with passion and precision, painting a picture of genius and determination and legacy. When he finished, the applause was genuine and sustained. Victoria returned to the podium. Bidding will begin at $1 million, paddles registered and verified. All sales final. Ethan's heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. Do I have 1 million? 3 paddles went up simultaneously. 1,100,000. More paddles. 1,500,000. The bidding accelerated. 2 million. 3 million. 4 million. The numbers climbed with terrifying speed, wealthy collectors competing with the casual intensity of people for whom money was just a tool, not a constraint. Ethan stopped breathing somewhere around 5 million. At 6 million, the pace slowed. Half the bidders had dropped out. At 7 million, only 4 paddles remained active. Victoria's voice remained calm, professional, completely controlled. 7,200,000. Do I have 7,000,005? A paddle near the front, the Japanese collector Cole had mentioned. 7,500,000. Do I have 7,000,007? A different paddle. Someone Ethan didn't recognize. The Japanese collector countered immediately. 8 million. The room went very quiet. Victoria looked around, giving time for additional bids. $8 million. Do I have 8,000,000 too? Nothing. Fair warning at $8 million. One of the other bidders raised their paddle. 8,200,000. Do I have 8,000,005? The Japanese collector again. This continued for another 3 minutes, brutal, surgical increments while Ethan watched numbers that didn't feel real anymore. 8,000,007. 8,000,009. 9 million. $9 million. At 9,200,000, something shifted. The remaining bidders hesitated. Victoria waited, reading the room with expert precision. 9,200,000 going once. Silence. 9,200,000 going twice. Still nothing. Ethan realized he'd been holding his breath. Sold for $9,200,000 to paddle 47. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent hall. Then, applause. Genuine, sustained applause that filled the room and seemed to acknowledge not just the sale, but the entire improbable story. Ethan sat in the private box, staring at the stage, trying to process what had just happened. $9,200,000. For a car he'd bought 6 weeks ago for $11,000. For a car Victoria Sterling had called scrap metal. For a car that everyone had walked past without seeing. Someone appeared in the doorway of the private box, Davis from the security team. Ms. Sterling asked me to escort you to the private office. Paperwork to sign. Ethan stood on legs that didn't feel entirely stable and followed Davis through corridors to a quiet office where Victoria and Adrian Cole were waiting, along with a notary and Sarah Martinez, his lawyer. Congratulations, Sarah said, all business. I've reviewed the sale documents. Everything's in order. The signing took 20 minutes. Papers, signatures, initials, electronic transfers. The bureaucracy of changing your entire life came down to a stack of documents and a series of scrawled signatures. When it was done, Sarah shook his hand. The money will be in your account within 72 hours, minus the agreed commission and fees. Total net to you should be approximately $8,400,000. $8,400,000. Ethan couldn't form words. Adrian Cole approached and pulled him into an unexpected hug. Thank you, the older man said, his voice rough. Thank you for finding it, for recognizing it, for bringing it back. I just looked closer than other people. Exactly. After Cole left, Victoria remained standing by the window that overlooked Fifth Avenue. The office was quiet now, just the two of them. That was incredible, Ethan said finally. That was appropriate. The car deserved that kind of attention. You made it happen. Victoria turned from the window. You made it happen by seeing value where I saw nothing. I just corrected my mistake. They stood there in awkward silence for a moment. What happens now? Ethan asked. Now you go home to your daughter and figure out what comes next. And Ethan, don't let the money change who you are. You saw something real when everyone else was blind. That's rare. Don't lose it. He drove home through Manhattan traffic in a daze, the city lights blurring past while his brain tried and failed to process the evening. $9 million. $8.4 million after fees. Money that would secure Lily's future, expand the garage, eliminate every financial pressure that had defined his adult life. And yet somehow, driving through Brooklyn toward home, all he could think about was the look on Adrian Cole's face when he'd talked about his father's legacy, about Victoria Sterling admitting she'd been wrong, about the car itself, now owned by someone who'd probably never crawl underneath it with a flashlight, never appreciate the hand-welded seams and custom fabrication that made it extraordinary. He parked outside the garage at 10:47 p.m. Mrs. Chen met him at the door, her eyes bright with curiosity. Well, it's sold. For? $9.2 million. Mrs. Chen actually gasped. That's real money, Ethan. Yeah, it is. After she left, Ethan climbed the stairs to find Lily still awake, sitting up in bed with her stuffed rabbit. You promised to wake me up, she said accusingly. You're already awake. I wanted to make sure you didn't forget. Ethan sat on the edge of her bed. The car sold for $9 million. Lily's eyes went wide. That's a lot. Yeah, sweetheart, that's a lot. Are we rich now? Yeah, I guess we are. Lily considered this seriously. Can we still get pizza on Fridays? Ethan laughed, something tight in his chest loosening. Yeah, Lil, we can still get pizza on Fridays. Good, I like our pizza nights. She fell asleep within minutes, her breathing evening out while Ethan sat there in the dark, listening to the sounds of Brooklyn outside the window. Car alarms. Distant sirens. The constant hum of the city that never actually slept. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Thank you for trusting me to make this right. You deserved better than my initial judgment, and I hope tonight proved that. V. Ethan stared at that message for a long moment, then typed back, Thank you for seeing past your mistake. Not everyone does. He didn't get a response, but he hadn't expected one. Downstairs, the garage sat empty except for the 3 cars waiting for repairs and the ghost of the space where the race car had been. Ethan stood there in the darkness, feeling the weight of what had just happened, knowing that tomorrow would bring changes he couldn't predict. But tonight, Lily was safe. The money would clear. And somewhere in Manhattan, an extraordinary car was being celebrated by people who finally understood its worth. Sometimes, Ethan thought, paying attention was enough. Sometimes looking closer changed everything. Sunday morning came with a hangover Ethan hadn't earned. He'd barely slept, his mind cycling through the auction on repeat, the numbers climbing, Victoria's controlled voice,
The moment the gavel came down and everything changed. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling until Lily knocked on his door at 7:30, asking if they were still getting pancakes like they did every Sunday. Right. Pancakes. Normal life. Yeah, sweetheart. Give me 10 minutes.
They went to the diner 3 blocks over, the same place they'd been going since Lily was old enough to sit in a booth. The waitress knew their order before they sat down: chocolate chip pancakes for Lily, coffee, and eggs for Ethan. The vinyl seats were cracked and repaired with duct tape. The coffee tasted like it had been brewed sometime last week. It was perfect. "So we're really rich now?" Lily asked through a mouthful of pancakes. "Don't talk with your mouth full. And yes, we're really rich now." "How rich?" "Enough that you don't have to worry about money ever again." Lily considered this while drowning her pancakes in more syrup than any human should consume. "Does that mean I can get a puppy?" "We'll talk about it." "That's what you always say when the answer is no." "That's not true." "It is, though." Ethan couldn't help but smile. Even with $8 million about to land in his bank account, his daughter could still negotiate circles around him. Some things money wouldn't change. They finished breakfast and walked home through Brooklyn streets that looked exactly the same as they had yesterday, before the auction, before everything. Same cracked sidewalks, same bodega on the corner, same guy selling newspapers from a folding table. Nothing had changed except everything. Back at the garage, Ethan tried to focus on the Subaru that needed a head gasket replacement. He got as far as removing the valve covers before his phone started ringing. The first call was from a financial advisor he'd never heard of. The second was from a wealth management firm. The third was a reporter asking for his reaction to a blog post claiming the whole authentication was a fraud. He stopped answering after that. By Monday, the money still hadn't cleared, but the attention had somehow gotten worse. There were emails from investment advisors, insurance agents, real estate brokers, and at least 6 people claiming to be long-lost relatives. Someone had posted his address online, and now random people kept walking by taking pictures of the garage. "This is temporary," Sarah Martinez told him during a phone call Monday afternoon. "Give it 2 weeks and they'll find someone else to obsess over." 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Look, you need to make some decisions. The money's going to clear Wednesday morning. You need a real financial plan before that happens, or you're going to get eaten alive by people who think you're an easy target. She recommended a firm that specialized in sudden wealth, lottery winners, inheritance recipients, people who'd gotten lucky and didn't know how to protect themselves. Ethan made an appointment for Thursday. Tuesday brought a surprise visit from Damian Cross. Ethan was under the Toyota doing routine maintenance when he heard expensive shoes clicking across the concrete floor. He slid out from under the car to find Cross standing there with the same cold smile he'd worn during their previous encounters. "Congratulations on your sale," Cross said. $9,200,000. Impressive number. "What do you want?" "I wanted to make sure there were no hard feelings. I made several offers. You declined. The auction played out fairly. That's business." "Okay. So no hard feelings. You can leave now." Cross didn't move. "I also wanted to give you some advice. Unsolicited, but valuable. You're a mechanic, Mr. Mercer. You understand cars, not wealth. The people circling you right now, they're going to promise you things. Easy returns, guaranteed investments, opportunities that sound too good to be true. And they'll all be scams." "Yeah, I get it. Do you?" "Because statistically, people who come into sudden money lose most of it within 5 years. Bad investments, bad advice, bad decisions made from a place of inexperience." Ethan stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Why do you care what happens to my money?" "I don't, particularly. But I respect what you did, finding that car, recognizing its value, holding your ground during the process. It would be a shame to watch you squander it. Thanks for the concern. I'll be careful." Cross pulled a business card from his jacket and set it on the workbench. "If you decide you want actual professional guidance from someone who knows this world, call me. No pressure, no games. Just a genuine offer." After he left, Ethan picked up the card. Embossed lettering, expensive stock. He should probably throw it away. Cross was exactly the kind of person Sarah had warned him about. Smooth, confident, ready to take advantage of naivete. But he pocketed the card anyway. Wednesday morning at 9:17 a.m., his phone pinged with a notification from his bank. Ethan was making coffee when it happened, still in sweatpants and a t-shirt that had more holes than fabric. He opened the banking app and stared at the number. $8,437,750. $8,437,750. The coffee maker beeped behind him, announcing the brew cycle was complete. Somewhere upstairs, Lily was singing off-key to a song from a movie she'd watched 17 times. Outside, a garbage truck rumbled past, its hydraulics wheezing and grinding. Everything was completely normal except for the number on his phone screen that refused to feel real. Ethan sat down at the kitchen table and just breathed for a minute. His father had died, leaving him a failing garage and $17,000 in debt. He'd spent 13 years clawing his way to stable. Not comfortable, not secure, just stable. Paying rent on time, keeping food in the fridge, making sure Lily had what she needed. And now this. "Daddy, can I have cereal?" Lily appeared in the doorway, already dressed for school in mismatched socks and a shirt she'd insisted on wearing 3 days in a row.
"Yeah, sweetheart. Get the bowl down. I'll pour." They had breakfast together like they did every morning. Lily told him about a project at school involving construction paper and glue. Ethan listened and responded and tried to pretend the number in his bank account wasn't screaming for attention in the back of his mind. After dropping Lily at school, he drove to the financial planning office Sarah had recommended. It was in a nondescript building in Midtown, all glass and steel, and the kind of aggressive professionalism that made Ethan feel immediately out of place. The advisor was a woman named Patricia Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen apparently, who was maybe 50 and had the direct manner of someone who'd dealt with every kind of financial disaster imaginable. "Mr. Mercer, I've reviewed the information your attorney sent over. $8.4 million from the auction sale, minimal existing debt, one dependent, currently self-employed, operating a small business. That's the situation. What are your goals?" Ethan hadn't expected the question to be that broad. "Not lose it all?" Patricia smiled slightly. "Good start. Let's be more specific. Do you want to continue operating your garage?" "Yeah, I like fixing cars." "Then we'll structure things so the business can expand sustainably without overextending. Do you have education expenses to plan for?" "My daughter's 6. College is probably happening eventually." "We'll set up an education trust. What about housing? The financial disclosure shows you rent both your business space and living quarters." "I like where we are. But maybe updating the apartment would be good. My daughter says the couch smells like sadness." Patricia actually laughed at that. "We'll budget for furniture. Now, the important question, how much money do you need to feel secure annually?" Ethan thought about that. Before the car, he'd been scraping by on maybe $40,000 a year. Good years. Half of that went to rent, utilities, basic expenses. The rest got stretched impossibly thin. "I don't know. 60,000? Enough to not worry every time something breaks? Conservative. I like it. Here's what I'm proposing. We take $7 million and invest it in a diversified portfolio designed for long-term growth and stability. Conservative allocation, minimal risk. That should generate roughly $280,000 annually in returns." Ethan's brain stuttered. $280,000 a year? Approximately, depending on market performance. We'll use that to fund your living expenses, business operations, and additional savings. The remaining $1.4 million we keep liquid for immediate needs, business expansion, property improvements, emergency fund, and what I call life happens money. She walked him through spreadsheets and projections, explaining investment strategies in language that was almost comprehensible. Stocks, bonds, index funds, municipal securities. Words that had never meant anything to Ethan suddenly represented his entire future. By the time he left the office 3 hours later, he'd signed documents setting up trusts, investment accounts, and financial structures he barely understood but trusted Sarah had vetted properly. His phone rang as he reached his truck. "Victoria Sterling. I hope I'm not interrupting. Just finished with a financial advisor. My brain feels like soup." "Welcome to having money. It gets easier." She paused. "I'm calling because I wanted to let you know the buyer has requested to meet you." "The Japanese collector?" "Yes, his name is Kenji Yamamoto. He's a serious automotive historian, owns one of the most significant private collections in the world.
He specifically asked if you'd be willing to have lunch with him this week. Why? He wants to understand the discovery process, how you found it, what you saw, why you recognized its significance. He's obsessed with the story as much as the car itself. Ethan had no interest in reliving the whole experience for a stranger, but something in Victoria's tone suggested this wasn't really optional. When? Thursday at 1. I'll send you the restaurant details. And Ethan, dress nicely. This isn't a diner in Brooklyn. Thursday arrived faster than Ethan wanted. He dropped Lily at school, went home to change into the suit he'd worn to the auction, and drove into Manhattan feeling like he was headed to a job interview he hadn't applied for. The restaurant was the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu. All exposed brick and soft lighting and waiters who moved like they were performing choreography. Ethan gave his name to the host and was led to a private table in the back, where an elderly Japanese man sat reading what looked like an original engineering manual. Kenji Yamamoto stood as Ethan approached. He was small, precise, probably in his 70s, and his handshake was surprisingly firm. Mr. Mercer, thank you for meeting me. Mr. Yamamoto, please sit. I took the liberty of ordering wine. I hope you don't mind. Ethan didn't particularly like wine, but he wasn't about to say that. That's fine. They made small talk while the wine arrived and was poured with excessive ceremony. Yamamoto asked about the garage, about Brooklyn, about how long Ethan had been working with cars. His English was perfect, barely accented, and his questions were genuinely curious rather than politely perfunctory. I've been collecting automotive history for 43 years, Yamamoto said eventually. I've owned cars that belonged to royalty, race cars that won championships, prototypes that changed the industry. But the Phoenix Project... He paused, searching for words. This is different. This was lost. Forgotten. Dismissed as worthless. Until it wasn't, Ethan said. Until you look closer than anyone else. That's what fascinates me. Not the car itself, though it's extraordinary, but the fact that it sat in an auction preview surrounded by collectors and experts and wealthy buyers, and only you saw its value. I got lucky. Luck is what you call skill when you're being modest. Tell me, what made you stop and examine it? Ethan thought back to that day in the auction hall. The dusty car in the corner, Victoria's dismissive comment, the feeling that something was wrong with how everyone was ignoring it. The welding, he said. The frame showed hand welding, really good work. Not factory production. That meant someone built it custom, which meant someone cared enough to do it right. Cars like that don't just appear for no reason. Yamamoto listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed deep technical knowledge. They talked through lunch about metallurgy, fabrication techniques, the specific engineering choices Adrian Cole Sr. had made. It was the kind of conversation Ethan would have with another mechanic, not a wealthy collector. And he found himself relaxing despite the expensive surroundings. I'm planning to display the car publicly, Yamamoto said as they finished eating. Not locked in a private garage, but in a museum where people can see it. The story of its discovery will be part of the exhibition, including your name, if you permit it. You don't need my permission. Actually, I do. This is as much your story as it is Adrian Cole's. You gave the car back its history. Ethan considered that. Yeah, okay. You can use my name. They talked for another hour, and by the time Ethan left the restaurant, he understood why Yamamoto had spent $9 million on a rusty race car. It wasn't about the money or the prestige. It was about preserving something that mattered, something that almost vanished because nobody bothered to look. His phone buzzed as he walked back to his truck. A text from Victoria. How did it go? Better than expected. He's not what I thought. Wealthy people rarely are. Are you free tomorrow afternoon? I'd like to discuss something. Vague and mysterious. Should I be concerned? Only moderately. They agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Brooklyn, neutral territory between her world and his. Ethan spent the rest of Thursday afternoon at the garage working on actual repairs, grateful for the familiar rhythm of tools and engines and problems that had clear solutions. Friday afternoon, Victoria showed up at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, which somehow didn't surprise Ethan at all. She wore casual clothes, or what passed for casual in her world, jeans that probably cost $300, and a sweater that looked effortlessly expensive. You're not wearing a suit, Ethan observed as he sat down. Neither are you. I'm never wearing a suit. You usually are. Today felt like a day for not being the auction house CEO. She ordered something complicated with 3 modifiers. Ethan got black coffee. They sat by the window watching Brooklyn move past outside. Delivery trucks, pedestrians, the constant flow of a neighborhood that didn't care about automotive discoveries or auction records. I wanted to talk to you about what happens next, Victoria said. Next for who? For both of us, actually. Sterling Elite has received significant positive attention from how we handled the Phoenix project sale. The transparency, the authentication process, the special event, it's exactly the kind of reputation building we need. That's good. It is. But it's also made me realize something. I've been running that auction house the same way for 6 years. Same procedures, same assumptions, same way of evaluating what's valuable and what isn't. And I almost missed the most significant sale of my career because I stopped actually looking at what was in front of me. Ethan sipped his coffee and waited. Victoria didn't seem like someone who admitted mistakes easily, and he had the sense this was going somewhere specific. I want to create a new division, she continued, focused specifically on overlooked items, undervalued pieces, things that don't fit traditional auction categories. Not junk, but things that require expertise to recognize their worth. Sounds like a lot of work. It would be. Which is why I'm asking if you'd be interested in consulting. Ethan nearly dropped his coffee. What? You have an eye for value that most people don't. You see past surface damage to what's underneath. That's rare, Ethan. And it's exactly what this division would need, someone who can identify potential in things other experts dismiss. I'm a mechanic, not an art expert or antiques dealer. I know, but the skill translates. Looking closely, seeing details others miss, understanding quality work even when it's hidden under decades of neglect, that applies to more than just cars. Ethan leaned back in his chair, processing. You want me to look at items for your auction house and tell you if they're worth more than they seem? Essentially, yes. Part-time, flexible schedule. You keep running your garage, but a few times a month you come to previews and tell me what I'm missing. We'd pay consulting fees, obviously. How much? Victoria named a number that made Ethan's coffee suddenly taste better. That's insane, he said. That's what your expertise is worth. I made an $8 million mistake by dismissing your opinion. I'm not making that mistake again. Ethan thought about it. The money was almost irrelevant now. He had more than he needed. But the idea of using the skills his father had taught him, of proving that looking closer actually mattered in context beyond his garage, that appealed to something he hadn't known he wanted. I'd need to think about it. Of course. Take your time. The offer stands whenever you're ready. They finished their coffee and talked about other things. Lily's school, Victoria's ongoing battles with the Sterling Elite Board, the weird experience of suddenly having money. It was surprisingly easy, this conversation. Not friendship exactly, but something approaching mutual respect. After Victoria left, Ethan sat there for a while longer, watching the neighborhood through the window. A year ago, his biggest concern had been making rent. 6 months ago, he'd been worried about affording new tires. 2 months ago, he'd been standing in an auction hall being laughed at for bidding on scrap metal. Now he had $8 million in job offers from Manhattan auction houses. Life was strange. He drove home to find Mrs. Chen waiting outside the garage with Lily, who immediately ran over chattering about a spelling test she'd aced. Daddy, I got all the words right, even necessary, which is super hard. That's my girl. I'm proud of you. Mrs. Chen caught his eye over Lily's head, her expression knowing. You look thoughtful. Long day. Good, but long. The money cleared? Yeah. And you're still the same Ethan who brings Lily to school in a truck held together with hope and duct tape? I like my truck, she smiled. Then you'll be fine. That evening, Ethan made spaghetti, the same jarred sauce, the same cheap pasta, and they ate dinner at the same wobbly table. Lily told him about recess and her friend Emma's new shoes and whether they could maybe possibly get a puppy since they were rich now. We'll see, Ethan said, which made Lily roll her eyes because they both knew what that meant. After Lily went to bed, Ethan walked down to the garage and stood in the space where the race car had been. The concrete was still cleaner there, a perfect rectangle marking where something extraordinary had sat for 6 weeks. His phone buzzed. A text from Adrian Cole. Yamamoto called me today. He wants me to consult on the museum exhibition. Said you made quite an impression. Thank you again for everything, Ethan. My father would have been proud to know someone like you found his car. Ethan read that message 3 times, then looked around his small, cluttered garage with its ancient tools and cracked floor, and the comfortable disorder of a working shop. He thought about his father, Thomas Mercer, who taught him to look closer, to see past appearances, to trust his instincts even when everyone else disagreed. Thomas had never had $8 million, had never sold anything at a Manhattan auction, had never made headlines or gotten consulting offers from powerful CEOs. But he taught Ethan something more valuable than any of that, how to recognize worth when others saw nothing. And in the end, that had changed everything. Ethan pulled out his phone and typed a response to Victoria's earlier message. "I'll do it. The consulting work. But I have conditions. Flexible schedule, nothing that interferes with Lily, and I'm still running my garage. This doesn't replace who I am." The response came within seconds. "Deal. Welcome to Sterling Elite, Mr. Mercer." Ethan looked at that message and smiled slightly. 6 weeks ago, Victoria Sterling had called him a mechanic like it was an insult. Now she was offering him a job. People could change, mistakes could be corrected, and sometimes looking closer led to places you never expected. He locked up the garage, checked on Lily one more time. She was sprawled across her bed, one arm around her stuffed rabbit, completely at peace, and went to his own room. Tomorrow he'd fix the Subaru's head gasket. He'd pick Lily up from school. He'd make dinner and help with homework and live the same life he'd been living before the car. Except now, everything was different. And somehow, everything was exactly the same. The things that mattered hadn't changed. Lily's safety, honest work, paying attention to details others missed. The money just meant he could do all of that without the constant weight of barely surviving. That, Ethan thought as he finally fell asleep, was enough. 3 months later, Ethan stood in a different auction preview hall, this one in Connecticut, staring at what everyone else had walked past without a second glance. It was a desk, Victorian era probably, covered in water damage and missing 2 of its drawer pulls. The veneer was peeling in places, and someone had spray painted "free" on one side in electric blue. Victoria stood beside him, arms crossed, waiting. "Well?" Ethan crouched down, running his fingers along the underside of the desk. The joinery was dovetailed by hand, not machine cut. The wood underneath the ruined veneer was bird's-eye maple, expensive and difficult to work with. And there, barely visible beneath decades of grime, was a maker's mark he recognized from a book Adrian Cole had loaned him about American furniture craftsmen. "It's real," he said. 1870s, probably made by the Herder Brothers workshop in New York. Under all this damage, it's worth maybe $40,000 restored. Victoria pulled out her phone and made a note. "How sure are you?" 80%. You'd need a furniture expert to confirm, but the construction matches their methods. That's the 4th piece you've identified today. She sounded almost annoyed about being impressed. "You're making this look too easy." "It's not easy. It's just paying attention." They'd been doing this for 12 weeks now, Ethan coming to previews twice a month, walking through estates and collections while Victoria pointed at items she was uncertain about. Sometimes he found nothing. Sometimes he'd spot details that changed an item's value from hundreds to thousands. Twice, he'd identified pieces significant enough to warrant special authentication processes. The consulting work paid well, but more importantly, it had given Ethan a strange kind of validation. The skills his father had taught him, looking closely, questioning assumptions, trusting careful observation over first impressions, those skills mattered beyond his garage in Brooklyn. "We're done here," Victoria said, checking her watch. "I have a meeting at 4 and you probably want to get back before Lily's out of school." They walked to the parking lot together, Ethan toward his truck, still the same one, still held together with optimism and stubbornness, and Victoria toward the town car that waited for her. "Same time next month?" she asked. "I'll be there." The drive back to Brooklyn took 90 minutes through traffic that made Ethan appreciate why people paid for drivers. He made it home with 20 minutes to spare before Lily's school let out, which gave him just enough time to check on the garage renovations. He'd finally pulled the trigger on expansion 2 months ago, knocked out a wall to double the working space, installed proper lifts, upgraded the electrical system. The old tools were still there, still in use, but now they shared space with equipment that actually worked reliably. Marcus, his landlord, had nearly cried with relief when Ethan signed a 10-year lease extension and paid 6 months in advance. The upstairs apartment had gotten renovated too. New furniture, including a couch that Lily confirmed did not smell like sadness, fresh paint, and actual functioning appliances. But they'd kept the same 2 bedrooms, the same view of the street. Lily had been adamant about not moving, and honestly, Ethan agreed. This was home. He picked Lily up from school at 3:15. She climbed into the truck with her backpack dragging and immediately launched into a detailed explanation of why her teacher was wrong about the proper way to solve long division. She says you have to show all the work, but I can do it faster in my head, so why does it matter? Because showing your work proves you understand the process. That's what she said. It's still annoying. Ethan smiled. Lily at 6 had been sweet and compliant. Lily at 7 was developing opinions and the vocabulary to defend them. He wasn't sure if he should be proud or terrified. Probably both. How was the auction thing? Lily asked as they drove home. Found a desk worth $40,000 that everyone thought was garbage. That's your superpower. Finding expensive garbage? Seeing stuff other people miss. Emma says that's basically a superpower. Emma's very wise for a 7-year-old. They stopped at the grocery store because Ethan had forgotten they were out of milk, then headed home. Mrs. Chen was waiting outside the garage with a package that had been delivered. UPS came an hour ago, she said, handing over a box covered in international shipping labels. Looks important. The return address was from Japan. Kenji Yamamoto. Ethan opened it that evening after dinner while Lily did homework at the kitchen table. Inside was a book, beautifully bound, probably custom-made, along with a handwritten note. Mr. Mercer, the museum exhibition opened last week to remarkable reception. I wanted you to have the first copy of the catalog. Your story is told on pages 47 to 53. Thank you again for preserving history. K. Yamamoto. Ethan flipped to page 47 and found photographs of the Phoenix Project in its new home. A glass case in a Tokyo Automotive Museum, lit dramatically and surrounded by placards explaining its significance. One of the placards included a section titled Discovery and Authentication that detailed how a mechanic in Brooklyn had recognized what experts had missed. There was even a photo of Ethan, taken at the auction, looking uncomfortable in his suit. Lily peered over his shoulder. Is that our car? It was never really ours, sweetheart. But yeah, that's the one. It looks nicer than when it was in our garage. Everything looks nicer in museums. He read through the catalog entry while Lily went back to her math homework. The write-up was thorough, respectful, and told the whole story. The auction preview, Victoria's initial dismissal, Ethan's persistence, the authentication process, the eventual sale. Reading it felt surreal, like learning about someone else's life. His phone rang. Adrian Cole. Have you seen the catalog? Just got my copy. Yamamoto did right by the story. Did right by my father's legacy, too. The exhibition is getting international attention. There's talk of a documentary. About the car? About the whole thing. The discovery, the authentication, what it means that something this significant was almost lost because people stopped looking. They want to interview you. Ethan's stomach tightened. I don't know about that. Think about it. No pressure. But Ethan, this story matters. Not just the car, but what you represent. Someone who saw value where others saw nothing. That's worth documenting. After they hung up, Ethan sat with that idea for a while. He'd never sought attention, never wanted to be the story, instead of just the person who'd gotten lucky. But Cole had a point. The Phoenix Project mattered because it almost vanished. It mattered because everyone, including experts, collectors, and auctioneers, had looked right past it. And it mattered because one person had bothered to look closer. The following week brought an unexpected visitor. Ethan was replacing brake pads on a Honda when Davis from the old security team appeared in the garage doorway. Mr. Mercer, got a minute? They hadn't spoken since the auction. The security detail had ended once the car was transported, and Ethan had assumed that was the last he'd see of the professional protection that had briefly been part of his life. What's up? Davis looked uncomfortable, which was unusual for someone who'd spent years in situations where discomfort could get you killed. I wanted to apologize. For what? For thinking you were in over your head. When Sterling Elite hired us to watch the car, I read the file. Mechanic from Brooklyn bought something at auction, thinks it's worth millions. I figured you were either delusional or running a scam. Ethan wiped grease from his hands. That's a reasonable assumption. Maybe. But I was wrong. You knew exactly what you had,
And you handled pressure better than most people I've protected who were actually used to being rich. He extended his hand. That's worth respecting. They shook, and Davis left, and Ethan stood there thinking about how many people had underestimated him during this whole process. Victoria, Davis, probably half the people at that auction preview.
He'd proven them all wrong by doing nothing except trusting what his own eyes and experience told him. 2 weeks later, Victoria called with news. There's a collection coming up for auction, estate sale, elderly woman who passed away, house full of items her late husband accumulated over 40 years. The family wants everything sold quickly. They're not interested in sorting through decades of collecting. Okay? I've walked through the preview. It's overwhelming. Furniture, artwork, books, random mechanical parts, boxes of documents. The family hired an appraiser who said most of it was junk worth maybe $50,000 total. But you don't think so. I think I don't know. Which is why I want you to look at it before we commit to the auction. If it's actually valuable, we price it differently. If it's junk, we do a bulk sale and move on. When? Tomorrow, if you're available. I'll pay your full day rate plus expenses. Ethan checked his schedule. He had 2 oil changes and a diagnostic appointment, but nothing that couldn't be rescheduled. Yeah, I can do tomorrow. The estate was in Westchester, a sprawling house that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1975. The family had already moved out, leaving behind rooms packed with the accumulated debris of a long life, furniture stacked on furniture, boxes of books, tools and mechanical equipment in various states of decay. Victoria met him at the door with coffee and a tablet full of inventory notes. The appraiser spent 3 hours here and declared 90% of it worthless. I need to know if he's right. They started in the living room and worked methodically through the house. Most of it was exactly what the appraiser had said. Cheap furniture, mass-produced artwork, books with no particular value. But in the 3rd bedroom, converted into a workshop, Ethan found something that made him stop. A workbench covered in machinist tools. Not hardware store tools, but precision instruments. Micrometers, calipers, gauge blocks. And underneath the dust, manufacturer marks he recognized. These are Starrett tools, he said, picking up a micrometer carefully. Vintage, probably 1940s. Used but maintained. Victoria made notes. Value? Individually? Maybe a few hundred each. But as a collection? He started examining other items on the bench. If the guy who owned these knew what he was doing, and it looks like he did, this whole set could be worth $20,000 to the right buyer. They kept searching. In the garage, Ethan found partial engine blocks and transmission components that turned out to be from a rare Italian sports car. In the basement, buried under boxes of old magazines, he discovered technical drawings that appeared to be original design documents from an aerospace company. By the end of the day, they'd identified nearly $250,000 in items the original appraiser had missed completely. Victoria stood in the driveway as the sun set, reviewing her notes with an expression that was equal parts excited and frustrated. I'm starting to think every appraiser I've ever worked with needs their eyes checked. They're looking for obvious value, Ethan said. Signatures on paintings, stamps on furniture, certificates of authenticity. When something's valuable but not obviously so, it gets missed. How did you learn to see this stuff? Ethan thought about his father, about years of being dragged to junkyards and estate sales, about Thomas Mercer pointing at random objects and asking, what is that really worth? Practice. And someone who taught me that surface condition doesn't determine actual value. They drove back to the city in separate vehicles, but Victoria called him before he'd made it to the highway. I want to hire you full-time. Ethan nearly swerved into the next lane. What? Not as a consultant, as a partner. We create a new division of Sterling Elite focused on unconventional acquisitions, estates, collections, items that don't fit traditional categories. You run it, I provide the infrastructure and auction platform. Victoria, I'm a mechanic. You're someone who sees value that others miss, that's worth more than any degree or certification. She paused. Think about it. No rush. But Ethan, you're good at this. Really good. And I think we could do something significant together. He didn't answer right away. His first instinct was to say no. He liked his garage, liked fixing cars, liked the simple clarity of mechanical problems. But part of him wondered what it would be like to make this official, to build something around the skills his father had taught him. I'll think about it, he said finally. That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan walked down to the garage and sat in the space where the Phoenix project had been. The concrete had long since lost its clean rectangle outline, covered now by new oil stains and tire marks from customer vehicles. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. No pressure on the partnership offer. But I meant what I said. You have a gift. Ethan stared at that message for a long time. A gift. His father would have laughed at that phrasing. Thomas Mercer would have called it paying attention, doing the work, not being lazy. But maybe it was both. Maybe the gift was being taught to look, and then actually doing it consistently even when it was easier not to. He typed back, "Can I keep running the garage?" The response came immediately. Absolutely. The partnership is additive, not replacement. Ethan sat with that, thinking about what it would mean. More work, certainly. More time away from the garage, but also more opportunities to prove that careful observation mattered, that the things people threw away often had value. Okay, he texted. Let's do it. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, really? Really? But we do this right, transparent pricing, honest authentication, no cutting corners. I wouldn't have it any other way. The partnership was formalized over the next month with contracts and structures and more legal documents than Ethan had ever seen. Sarah Martinez reviewed everything with her characteristic skepticism and eventually declared it fair. You're getting 30% equity in the new division, full decision-making authority on acquisitions, and a salary that's frankly insulting given what you bring to the table. The salary's fine. It's not, but you're too nice to negotiate properly. I added a performance bonus structure. You're welcome. The new division launched quietly in late spring. They called it Sterling Recognition, which Ethan thought sounded pretentious, but Victoria insisted would play well with clients. The concept was simple. They'd handle estates and collections that traditional auction houses dismissed, finding value in unconventional places. Their first major sale was the Westchester estate. It brought in $470,000, nearly 10 times what the family's original appraiser had projected. Word spread quickly through collector networks. By summer, they had more requests than they could handle. Ethan fell into a rhythm, 3 days a week at the garage, 2 days with Sterling Recognition, weekends with Lily. It was exhausting and fulfilling and occasionally overwhelming, but it worked. The garage stayed profitable, the partnership grew, and somehow he managed to be present for school concerts and parent-teacher meetings. Lily started calling him a treasure hunter, which was close enough to accurate that Ethan didn't correct her. In July, Victoria invited him to a formal dinner celebrating Sterling Elite's 100th anniversary. It was black tie, held at a venue in Manhattan that probably cost more to rent for one night than Ethan's garage generated in a year. Do I have to go? He asked when she extended the invitation. Yes, you're a partner now. You have to pretend to enjoy fancy events. That sounds terrible. It is, but there's good food and an open bar, which helps. Ethan bought another suit, his third in 6 months, which felt excessive, and showed up at the venue feeling exactly as out of place as expected. The room was full of wealthy collectors, auction house executives, and people whose net worth had more zeros than Ethan could comfortably count. He found Victoria near the bar, wearing a dress that looked like it cost more than a car. You came, she said. You said I had to. Fair point. Want a drink? Desperately. They stood together watching the crowd, neither of them particularly interested in mingling. Someone gave a speech about Sterling Elite's history. Someone else presented an award to a collector who'd spent millions at their auctions. The whole thing felt performative and exhausting. Can I ask you something? Victoria said during a lull in the program. Sure. Do you regret any of it? Finding the car, going through the auction, getting pulled into this world? Ethan thought about that. About the stress and pressure and sudden wealth. About the changes to his life, some wanted and some not. About standing in an auction hall being laughed at for seeing what others missed. No, he said. It was hard, but I don't regret it. What would you tell someone else who found themselves in a similar situation? Someone who discovered something valuable but didn't know what to do with it? Trust yourself, get good advice, and don't let people make you doubt what you know you saw. He paused. Why? Victoria was quiet for a moment.
Because I've spent 6 months watching you navigate sudden wealth without losing who you are. That's rare. Most people either get consumed by the money or reject it entirely. You've somehow managed to just integrate it into your life without letting it define you. I have a 7-year-old daughter who keeps me grounded. Hard to get too full of yourself when someone regularly reminds you that your dinner-making skills are okay at best. Victoria laughed, genuine and surprised. She sounds remarkable. She is. The evening wore on. Ethan made polite conversation with people whose names he'd forget by morning. He ate food that was beautiful but not particularly filling, and he counted down the minutes until he could reasonably leave without being rude. Around 10, Victoria found him again. You're miserable. I'm fine. You're terrible at lying. Go home to your daughter. I'll make your excuses. You sure? Positive. This isn't your world, Ethan, and honestly, I respect that you haven't tried to pretend it is. He drove back to Brooklyn feeling relieved and slightly guilty about the relief. Mrs. Chen was asleep on the couch when he got home. She'd offered to stay late so he could attend the dinner, and he woke her gently. How was the fancy party? She asked, gathering her things. Exactly as fancy as expected. Did you have fun? Not even a little bit. She patted his arm. Then you're still yourself. That's good. After she left, Ethan checked on Lily. She was sprawled across her bed in a position that looked deeply uncomfortable but somehow worked for her. Her stuffed rabbit had fallen on the floor. Ethan picked it up and tucked it back beside her. Love you, sweetheart, he whispered. She didn't wake up, just shifted slightly and kept sleeping. Downstairs, the garage was quiet and familiar. Tools on pegboards, parts bins organized the way he liked them, the smell of oil and metal and work that mattered. This was real. The fancy dinner, the partnership, the auction world, that was all fine. But this was home. His phone buzzed, a text from Adrian Cole. Documentary crew wants to schedule your interview next month. Still interested? Ethan stared at that message for a moment, then typed, Yeah, let's do it. The interview happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late August. The crew set up cameras in the garage, which felt appropriately symbolic, and spent 20 minutes adjusting lights and testing sound. The interviewer was a woman named Rebecca Chen, also no relation to Mrs. Chen. Apparently Brooklyn had a lot of Chens, who specialized in documentary storytelling about unexpected discoveries. I want to start with the moment you first saw the car, she said once recording began. What made you stop and look when everyone else walked past? Ethan thought back to that day in the auction hall, the dusty race car in the corner, Victoria's dismissive comment, the feeling that something was wrong with how everyone was ignoring it. The welding, he said, and the fact that nobody else seemed to care. When something's obviously valuable, everyone notices, but when something looks like garbage, people don't bother examining it. I guess I've learned to pay attention to the things nobody else thinks are worth their time. Your father taught you that? Yeah, he'd take me to junkyards when I was a kid, and we'd spend hours looking at broken cars. He'd point at something and ask what it was really worth. Not what it looked like, but what it actually was underneath the damage. That kind of training sticks with you. They talked for 90 minutes. About the authentication process, the auction, the sudden wealth, what had changed and what hadn't. Rebecca asked good questions, the kind that required actual thought rather than rehearsed answers. What do you want people to take away from this story? She asked near the end. Ethan considered that carefully. I think people miss extraordinary things because they stop looking too soon. They see surface damage and assume there's nothing worth finding underneath. But value isn't always obvious. Sometimes the most important things are hidden in plain sight, and the only way to find them is to actually do the work of looking. Is that a metaphor? Maybe, but it's also literally true. The Phoenix Project sat in an auction hall surrounded by experts and collectors. It was right there. Nobody saw it because nobody looked. After the interview wrapped, Rebecca and her crew packed up their equipment. She shook Ethan's hand before leaving. This is going to be a good film. Thank you for being honest about the process. When does it come out? Early next year. I'll make sure you get a copy before the public release. That evening, Ethan picked Lily up from her after-school program, and they stopped at the pizza place they'd been going to since she was old enough to eat solid food. Same booth in the back, same order. Plain cheese for Lily, pepperoni for Ethan. How was the camera thing? Lily asked through a mouthful of cheese. Fine. They asked a lot of questions about the car.
Did you tell them it was my idea to check under the rust? Ethan smiled. That definitely did not happen.
It should have. I would have found it too. I'm sure you would have, sweetheart. They ate their pizza while Lily told him about a substitute teacher who'd let them have extra recess and a boy in her class who claimed he could see the future but absolutely could not. Normal kid stuff. Normal life.
The documentary premiered the following March at a film festival in Manhattan. Ethan attended with Victoria and Adrian Cole, sitting in a darkened theater while his own face appeared on screen, talking about welding techniques and authentication processes. It was deeply weird watching himself, hearing his voice explain things that had felt so natural at the time. But the film was good. Rebecca had woven together the technical story with something bigger, about overlooking value and trusting observation and what it means to really see. When it ended, the audience applauded. Several people approached afterward to ask questions, to thank Ethan for sharing the story, to say they'd started looking more carefully at things they might have previously dismissed. One man, maybe 60, pulled Ethan aside near the exit. My father was a machinist. He tried to teach me to see quality work, to recognize craftsmanship. I never paid attention, thought it was boring. But your story made me realize I missed something important. It's not too late to learn, Ethan said. The man smiled sadly. He died 3 years ago, but thank you anyway. After he walked away, Victoria touched Ethan's arm. That's the impact. People seeing value differently because you showed them it matters. The documentary got picked up by a streaming service and reached a wider audience than anyone expected. Suddenly, Ethan's inbox was full of messages from people sharing their own stories of overlooked discoveries, asking for advice, thanking him for validating their instincts. Sterling Recognition's client requests tripled, and Ethan kept doing exactly what he'd been doing, running his garage 3 days a week, evaluating collections the other 2 days, spending weekends with Lily. 1 year after the auction, almost to the day, Kenji Yamamoto called from Tokyo. The museum exhibition is closing next month. We're creating a permanent display, but I wanted to let you know the Phoenix project has been seen by over 500,000 people. Your story inspired a new generation of automotive historians to look more carefully at overlooked vehicles. That's incredible. It's appropriate. Thank you again for preserving my father's legacy and my own. This car connects us across decades and continents. That's worth more than $9 million. After they hung up, Ethan sat in the garage thinking about that. The car had changed his life, yes, but it had also preserved Adrian Cole Sr.'s legacy, validated Yamamoto's decades of collecting, corrected Victoria's assumptions about value, and apparently inspired thousands of people to look more carefully at the world around them. All because one person had bothered to examine something everyone else dismissed. His phone buzzed. A text from Lily's school. Early dismissal due to a broken heating system. Ethan locked up the garage and drove over to pick her up. She climbed into the truck with her backpack and a drawing she'd made in art class. Look, Daddy, it's you in the race car. The drawing showed a stick figure mechanic standing beside a very angular representation of the Phoenix Project. Above them, in Lily's careful 7-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "My dad sees things." I love it, sweetheart. Mrs. Rodriguez said we had to draw someone important to us. I picked you because you found the treasure car. The car was important, but you know what's more important? What? You. Nothing I found or sold or discovered matters more than being your dad. Lily wrinkled her nose. That's really sappy, Daddy. Doesn't make it less true. They drove home through Brooklyn, the same streets he'd driven for 13 years. Past the bodega on the corner, past the park where Lily learned to ride a bike, past the diner where they got pancakes every Sunday. The money had changed some things. The garage was bigger now, the apartment nicer, the bank account substantially healthier. But the neighborhood was the same. The people were the same. And most importantly, Ethan was the same person who'd walked into that auction hall 18 months ago, just with better furniture and significantly less financial stress. That evening, while Lily did homework at the kitchen table, Ethan stood at the window looking down at the garage. A customer's car sat on the new lift, waiting for brake work tomorrow. Tools were organized on the pegboards. Everything was in its place, ready for another day of work. He thought about his father, Thomas Mercer, who died never knowing his son would one day sell a car for $9 million. Thomas had just tried to teach basic skills. Pay attention, look closely, don't trust first impressions. Those skills had changed everything. Ethan's phone rang. Victoria. Are you free next Tuesday? There's a collection in Boston I want you to evaluate. Family thinks it's worthless, but something about their description makes me think we should look. What's the collection? Old scientific instruments, microscopes, measuring devices, things the deceased grandfather accumulated over 40 years. I don't know anything about scientific instruments. You didn't know anything about furniture either until you identified a $40,000 desk. Just come look. Worst case, it's actually worthless and we walk away. Ethan checked his schedule. Yeah, I can do Tuesday. After they hung up, he returned to the window. Lily was erasing something on her homework, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. The apartment was warm and comfortable. The garage was profitable and expanding. Life was good. Not perfect. He still worried about being a good father, still struggled with work-life balance, still occasionally woke up at 3 a.m. wondering if he was screwing something up. But good. The Phoenix Project was in Tokyo now, admired by thousands, preserved for future generations. Adrian Cole Sr.'s legacy was secure. Victoria Sterling had learned to question her assumptions. And Ethan Mercer, a mechanic from Brooklyn, had proven that sometimes the most valuable things are the ones everyone else walks past without seeing. He thought about that first day in the auction hall, about Victoria's dismissive comment, about the dusty car in the corner that nobody wanted, about looking closer when it would have been easier to walk away. That decision had changed his life. But more importantly, it had validated something his father had always believed, that paying attention mattered, that surface appearances lied, that the world was full of extraordinary things hiding in ordinary shells. You just had to be willing to look. Daddy, can you help me with this problem? Ethan turned from the window. Which one?
The word problem about the train. I don't understand what it's asking. He sat down beside Lily at the table and read through the problem. It was poorly worded and confusing, the kind of thing that made you wonder if the textbook writers had ever actually met a child. Okay, let's break it down. What information do they give us? They worked through it together, Ethan asking questions until Lily figured out the answer herself. This was how Thomas had taught him too, not giving answers, but teaching how to find them. After Lily finished her homework, they made dinner together. Nothing fancy, just chicken and rice, but Lily insisted on helping and Ethan wasn't going to discourage that. Later, after Lily was asleep, Ethan returned to the garage one final time. He walked over to where the Phoenix Project had sat for 6 weeks, the space that was now just regular garage floor, indistinguishable from the rest. But Ethan remembered. He remembered every weld mark, every custom fabrication, every detail that had convinced him the car was something special. His phone buzzed one last time. A text from an unknown number. Mr. Mercer, my name is David Reston. I saw the documentary about the Phoenix Project. I have a grandfather who recently passed away and left behind a workshop full of tools and parts. The estate appraiser says it's all worthless, but something about your story makes me think I should get a second opinion. Would you be willing to take a look? I'll pay your consulting rate. Ethan stared at that message for a long moment. He could ignore it, could stick to his scheduled work with sterling recognition, could maintain boundaries between his life and random requests from strangers. But he thought about the man at the documentary premiere who'd missed the chance to learn from his father, about all the value that got thrown away because nobody bothered to look. He typed back, "Send me photos of the workshop. I'll let you know if it's worth an in-person visit." The response came quickly. "Thank you. Sending now." 10 photos appeared showing a cluttered workshop that probably hadn't been touched in years. Most of it looked like standard garage equipment, but in the background of the fourth photo, barely visible behind boxes, Ethan spotted something that made his heart rate pick up. A metalworking lathe, old, covered in dust, but with a manufacturer's plate he recognized. He zoomed in on the photo, squinting at the details. South Bend, probably 1940s. If it was in decent condition underneath the grime, it could be worth $15,000 to the right buyer. "When can I come see it?" he texted back. Tomorrow, he'd go to Boston with Victoria. Next week, he'd evaluate David Reston's grandfather's workshop. The week after that, there'd be something else. Another collection, another overlooked item, another chance to prove that paying attention mattered. But tonight, he was just Ethan Mercer, mechanic from Brooklyn, standing in his garage at the end of another day. He locked up, checked the security system, and climbed the stairs to his apartment. Lily's door was open a crack, her nightlight glowing soft and steady.
Ethan stood there for a moment, listening to her breathe, grateful for this life he'd built through luck and observation, and refusing to stop looking when everyone else walked away. The Phoenix Project was gone, sold to a collector who'd give it the home it deserved. But the skills that had helped Ethan find it, those remained. The ability to see past damage to value, to trust careful observation, to question assumptions. Those skills had changed his life once. And somewhere out there, in workshops and garages and estate sales across the country, there were more extraordinary things waiting to be found by someone willing to look closely enough to see them. Ethan turned off the lights and went to bed, already thinking about Boston, about scientific instruments he didn't understand yet, about another chance to prove that the things everyone else dismisses sometimes hold the most value of all. The world was full of hidden treasures. You just had to pay attention.